But ultimately, like, this is just a personal opinion, maybe from like people who have educated themselves, but obviously like our answer isn't final. So if you guys disagree, feel free to voice it. We're gonna try and get some chat interaction. Like, we're not gonna be setting up a poll necessarily every single time, but we grade things on a 1 through 4. Was it 1 through 4?
Yeah, 1 through 4.
1 through 4 scale. In other words, where 1 is going to be the lowest and 4 is the highest, and we definitely cheat. We do 1.5s, we do 2.5s, and so basically, in terms of how up the ladder they are, do you want to kind of do a rundown of like what those criteria are and like what they actually mean?
Yeah. So yes, we've got, and I'll add to that disclaimer is that we have our own perspectives on things, right? Like, so you, Spilo, being so heavily involved in the past in professional Overwatch, you kind of look at it from that sense. I tend to be a lot more, from what I see when I do VOD reviews and stuff, for people mostly like diamond and below. So although of course we will keep, these categories will naturally pull us towards one spectrum or the other. Yeah, we've got our perspectives and we're happy to hear yours, I think. So yeah, skill floor being how easy is this hero to get to some level of competence, to the base level of competence, in terms of like how difficult they are to get there. Skill ceiling, and of course feel free to chime in and disagree if I define anything.
Okay, sure.
Skill ceiling being basically how difficult is it to master every aspect of this hero and extract like the maximum out of their kit. Value floor being when played at a decent level of competence, how much value will this hero give? Compared to value ceiling, like what's the base value this hero will give? Like, how, you can't fuck up more than this. And value ceiling, of course, is when played, played decently, how much value will this character give, to their maximum, basically. What's the most amount of value this character can give you? Buffs, nerfs, obviously just simply, do we think they need a buff? Do we think they need a nerf? I think in the previous one, sometimes we just put like an asterisk next to 0 to say that they don't need necessarily a buff or a nerf, they just need a rework. And I feel like that might be used in some categories here. And fun against this is the most subjective. Simply, is this hero fun to play against? Like, when this hero comes up against you, do you feel like you're having a good contest, or does it feel really unfair and one-sided? So
For sure.
how's that sound, Philo?
That sounds great. I've got nothing to add on to there. I think you clarified it very well. I think the one thing I will add is that the things that we're most interested in looking at and discussing, especially when it comes to buffs, nerfs, fun against, etc., is there a big gap between a hero's floor value and skill? In other words, is a hero very easy to pick up and very strong? That's not good. Is a hero very difficult to pick up, very difficult to master, but very weak? That's also an issue, right? We want to be rewarded for the amount of time that we put into a hero. And there are some heroes like Tracer that are really, really good, and some heroes that aren't quite that good at like streamlining that whole process. So, we need to find a way to like provide that. Now, obviously, we did touch on how sometimes we kind of look at heroes and say, hey, this hero might be designed for beginner players, and that's just kind of how it's balanced. So that's something that we can kind of be open to. But I also think that that there's some heroes that aren't the case like that, and it's difficult to say exactly what the dev team's philosophy when it comes to that. Last thing I'm going to say before I guess we get started is that we're going to try and grade the 1 through 4 grade within the support category, but we're definitely going to be influenced by heroes outside of it. In other words, we're going to be grading things on a sliding scale, but we are going to have to kind of keep the whole cast in mind. So I think that's kind of what we did last time with DPS, but yeah, I think the same with supports as well.
Because there were some numbers I don't think that we used right in the DPS category. Like we said, like, oh, nobody is a, skill ceiling 3 or skill floor 3 or something, and there's nobody who's like a fun against 4 or something like that. So yeah, it may be the case that in one category there's nobody who's a skill ceiling 1 or a skill ceiling 4.
Sure.
So yeah, we'll have to look at the wider picture.
Agreed. And we start off with a tough one literally from the get-go. And it's going to be tough all the way through. Okay, so do you want to start off with skill floor and Ana, and then we can kind of alternate like we did last time?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's definitely a high skill floor, not necessarily as high as some of the DPS we went with, but I remember when Ana first came out, I remember quite vividly at the time, everyone was like, there's no point playing this hero because she's just too tough and like it's too hard to get value. When at the time, we had like Mercy and Lucio, Zen, who are viable.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the fact that there is obviously a sort of a good mechanical demand. This may be controversial to say, but support is a role you don't necessarily people haven't always associated with mechanical demand. So I think for that reason as well, Ana stands out as a hero that people like for this reason. I think that they feel it's a skillful hero. So I do think there's a decent skill floor involved in here.
For sure, for sure. And I think that the tricky part for me is that the skill floor for me and how I envision it is very different from, like, I think what I consider the value floor. In other words, when I think of Ana played at a base level, I think of getting some value out of nades, getting some value out of sleeps, not positioning like a complete moron. But unfortunately, a lot of times when I watch Anas in lower ranks and even mid ranks, is you see people that they don't get any value out of nade, they don't get like any value out of sleep, but they're still winning fights, right? Because the healing is still decent and nano boost is still strong. So I think this might be a hero where maybe we judge the skill floor based off of you at least occasionally get a nade or a sleep dart that has some impact. But the fact of the matter is that maybe this hero at its very floor isn't as hard as we think it is. Because, and I had this, my eyes opened by this as well, because there was a recent post, I don't know if you saw in competitive Overwatch, and Ana's pick rate in lower ranks and like win rate or whatever was actually really high, surprisingly high. Now, obviously, we're not expecting, no one's sleeping in Nanoblade. Nobody's, getting a 5-man biotic nade. Nobody's pressuring the Pharah out of the sky in those ranks. But maybe they're sitting behind Reinhardt and they're just pumping heals, and then, maybe Nano Boost has more value in those lower ranks than it does in higher ranks. So to me, like, Ana is definitely on paper the hero that's like very difficult to play, has a pretty high skill floor, but maybe it's not quite as high as we would like to believe, because of sometimes just her pressing mouse 1/Nano Boost gets more value than some other supports do. Like, what are your thoughts on that? And this is where I'm unsure on this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, you're saying that there's like a crutch element to it, right? Where it's like, and I do see this a lot. I see a lot of Ana just like right up the butt of their main tank, basically.
Right.
Pumping heals into him, chuck a nade on his back, nano him if in doubt. Yeah, I guess it just depends on what we say. Yeah, getting like decent value, or like being able to access their kit decently. I suppose the thing to that is that, yes, sleep dart would basically be non-existent if you're not skillful. Like, it's maybe you could shoot it at a tank and get, the odd sleep dart, but I think that that is one ability definitely inaccessible if you're not to some degree skillful. Nade, yes, you can definitely chuck it and pray. Nano, you can also chuck and pray. So yeah, you're right. Maybe like now again, this might be helpful to quickly glance back over some of the numbers we gave to the DPS. I think like a 2.5 strikes to me.
That's exactly what I was thinking. The exact number I was thinking. I think it's tough for me. And like I said, like the statistics I saw in Ana really blew me away. Like, I was not expecting Ana to have such a high pick rate and have such a high win rate in lower ranks compared to other supports. And it was just kind of was like, okay, well, I guess. Like, I don't, well, no. The question here is, why do we think that is? Is it, like we said, like, pumping up the rank? Is it the fact that Nano Boost, like just nanoing a tank, gets more value than other support ults at that rank?
There's a lot of potential ideas. I mean, one caveat I would also obviously give is that, we can't always trust the statistics. They're very,
True.
They're often liable to give a misleading picture of things. Like,
true.
Particularly, I think particularly because Ana can kind of, I definitely think there's always a bias in the metal ranks to heroes that can like solo carry a little bit, because I think that someone like a Mercy, it doesn't matter what you're doing in bronze, you have to, like, it doesn't matter who you're enabling if they also suck. And you'll probably like feel very helpless, right? Compared to Ana, where you could, even accidentally land a big nade, and it kind of, nade is hard to not win a fight with. Like, if you nade enough people, it's hard to not win that fight. So there's that one element. I think the other element is probably the strength of Reinhardt in the metal ranks, like in
that's
sub diamond.
For sure.
I think that how strong he is, and then therefore how well he synergizes with Ana, probably is what's giving her this high win rate, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head there. I think the Rein comparison is really, really big. But yeah, I'm comfortable with 2.5. I think, like, if we judge skill floors like being able to like land nade and sleeps occasionally, I think we could bump it up to a 3. But as it is, I think 2.5 is more than a fair grading. And then I guess we get to skill ceiling. Now, this is one that is going to be really is also tough, because like you think about Sleep Dart as a mechanic and ultimately her weapon as well, and there's just legitimately almost endless value that you can get, right? Like there's always that one Sleep Dart that you can land. Now it is projectile, which does mean that there is like, doesn't matter how good you are, you're going to miss sleeps. You're going to miss sleeps, assuming you're not just like sleeping the enemy Ryan off of cooldown. But even then, like there's counterplay around it, so you're not going to hit every sleep. But it is an ability that, you know, the better you get, the more opportunities you're going to be able to land. And also her gun. Now, her gun is like, everyone initially in lower ranks struggles to hit their own teammates. You know, like that's the real challenge. But as you get higher up in ranks, it's not about healing your own teammates. It's about actually hitting the enemies. And people bring up Ana as like the APM hero. The actions per minute, and it is because you can constantly, if you're not healing your team, you're pressuring enemies, you're pressuring squishies, you're shooting the Pharah, pressuring the Pharah a little bit, shooting that Genji, you know, force them to get a little healing, force that Tracer's recall, you know, like whatever you can do, you are constantly min-maxing every action. And if your mechanics are good and your like mental focus is good, you're going to be able to put out a lot of little chip value here and there. A little shot in a Genji, you know, a slightly higher percentage on your Sleep Dart usage, a little bit of pressure on the Pharah, a little bit of pressure on the enemy backline, and that's where I think the skill ceiling really starts to kick in. Now, the thing with ceiling that is a little bit less of an issue with on it is that yes, you can put a lot of shot and pressure out, but it's not necessarily going to have as big of an impact as somebody like Zenyatta. Like if what's more scary, a Zenyatta that legit doesn't misses, or an Ana that doesn't miss? And I think the answer there is pretty clearly Zen. So maybe that the ceiling is there, but maybe it's just not. It's the impact is so low, like it has diminishing returns maybe.
Well, yeah, but that's more of a value issue, right? Whereas in terms of actually doing it, it's that's equally different, like, difficult whether they turn the damage numbers up or not.
That's true.
I think the difficulty does, and I think the other thing to add to this is quick scoping, obviously, which is I guess really a unique thing for Ana, because there's not really any other character who as frequently quick scopes as her. Like I guess Widowmaker has some element of quick scoping, but not really, because you need to charge it up for it to be really effective. So, and I think that's interesting as well. I always like it when heroes have a secondary mechanic to master in that sense, like the way that, you know, I can see down the slideshow, Mercy has a super jump to master. Ana has a quick scope to master, where it's like, you know, you can just tell if you're watching someone who's sub diamond, they're probably not quick scoping, or they're trying so hard to quick scope that they're fucking up other, you know, actually key basic elements of their gameplay. So I think mixing in stuff like that, mixing in the quick scoping, mixing in the animation canceling, like you said, the high APM, the fact that, yeah, I think if you land everything, you're suddenly a lot more scary than an Ana who's, as we said earlier, like compared to an Ana who's landing the occasional Sleep Dart and the occasional anti-nade, the Ana who's like constantly pressuring and quickscoping the enemy DPS, getting consistent nades and sleeping everyone who like dives her. I think it's, yeah, I think it's right up there. I think alongside, you know, Zen, I think this is the highest skill ceiling support we have.
I can agree with that. I think one other thing as well is I don't think there's any part of her kit that's easy to use. Nade is not easy.
Yes.
Sleep is not easy. Positioning is not easy. And there's not, like, I wouldn't say Nade is crazy hard to use. I wouldn't say her positioning is crazy hard either. I think she's one of the more forgiving positional supports. But even her nano boost is not easy to use. Like everybody, again, in the metal ranks, it's like the nano, the Reinhardt off of cooldown. But especially once we get to that ceiling, the GM, the pro level, nano is actually a really hard ultimate to know when and how to use properly. And there's a big difference between a good nano and a bad nano. And that's because there's a lot of different heroes that you can nano. It just depends on the situation. You have to read the field, essentially. So I think, like, when you consider the fact there are no easy aspects of Ana, and that there is a lot of mechanical / decision-making part, I mean, what do you think rank here?
See, I'm just looking back, and we gave Tracer 4. I think we gave Widowmaker 3. What did we give it? 3.82. We cheated on that one. I think Sombra at 3.5. I'm thinking like that. See, now it's the debate. If we're thinking wider scope, because obviously someone like Sombra has a lot more difficult decision-making to make. I would either go 3 or 3.5, I think.
I think 3.5 for me. And the
Yeah.
reason why I'm saying that is, again, we're talking ceiling, right? So we're talking about like min maxing, playing it at the most. How hard is it to get there? And also the ceiling up against highly competitive enemies as well. So, you know, you can't afford to miss nades or sleeps against high level enemies. You know, you can't afford to screw up a nano. You get punished for that. So it's not just, oh, you can get the site, is you have to at this point in time. So part of the skill thing is like also being able to play around the enemy stuff. And I think 3.5 is fair. Maybe a low 3.5, but when we compare her to like Widow, I don't think it's fair to say Widow is a lot harder than Ana at all. I think it's fair to say Tracer might be a little harder than Ana, but I think, I definitely think ceiling is on par. It's certainly higher than like a Kree, who we gave a 3, right? I think it's more than fair to give an Ana a higher score than a McCree.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's definitely a fair statement. Okay, value floor then. I think this is my one. Yeah, so we kind of touched on this while we were mentioning the skill floor, that you can get value. Again, this becomes interesting because people often come to me and they're like, oh, well, what's a good accuracy on Ana? And I always say, well, there's no right answer because it depends what you're hitting. And people can just pump damage. Like, and you can just sit behind your Reinhardt, pump shots in his behind, and you'll get a good amount of value, I think. So actually, even though she is a tricky hero to actually understand and execute, there is the crutch of being able to just spam heal your tanks and be happy with it and get decent value.
Right. I mean, we touched on this a little bit with skill floor. I think skill floor, as we've said, and value floor are often very, very similar in terms of like their grading. I think, like you said, it's very easy to just spam heals. I don't think Nano Boost is a very hard ultimate to use at a lower rank. At a higher rank, it's a different story. I think she's got a relatively high skill, like value floor. So again, I want to cheat here. I want to look back. I mean, definitely does more than a Widow when played at the skill floor. I think she definitely does more than a Tracer, who scored at a 2. Torb, we got a 3. Soldier, I think, also had a 3. Maybe somewhere around that range. I think for me, I think a 2.5 or a 3 seems to be the best grade, because to me that's the balance of like, she's not insanely broken at lower ranks at all. She's not insanely strong at all. But also she isn't ridiculously hard to play. Again, we're reaching into the floor. Like people have to understand, when I say value floor, I don't mean the first time you ever played Ana. I mean, once you've played her for, I don't know, 15, 20 hours, like a gold rank, you've got a decent idea of what the hero does. I think compared to put down the same amount of time in other heroes, and you might not be able to hit it as high of a value. So I think, what do you think? Like, because I've already kind of given my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep in perspective, like, what maybe we'll give to the other supports. Because I also have to remember that, like, I have seen Ana's, like, even, at Plat and Diamond, where you're saying, I think when we think of value floor, we're probably thinking of someone like in like low Plat, I would say, is probably the area you're looking for, right? Where they've reached a general competence with the hero, so they're not just like walking wrong, but they're not necessarily using their abilities properly. And I've seen lots of those kind of level of players just completely still regularly throw nades wastefully and get nothing out of them, and just sleep Darcy like at flying Reddit Lucios, and they get nothing.
The hard thing is though is that how strong a hero is depends on where you would judge its skill floor. Like, we could look at a Moira and say a Moira might, because her value is like so low right now. Well, let me give a better example. Let's say a Tracer, a skill floor Tracer, because she's so hard to play, might be like, actually, that's not a good example either. This is rough, because the idea is that if a hero is really valuable, then you might not even be at a skill floor, it might be in Plat, But a hero right, exactly. But a hero might be so hard that you might be at like a skill floor, but still be stuck in like mid to high gold. So I think with Ana, with a higher skill floor, I do expect the value floor. For me, the skill floor has to be around Plat. Like, I don't think even an Ana at gold is doing anything right. Basically, very, very little right. So I think that's more than fair with Ana. But
I think 2.5 is fair. If you were saying either 2.5 or 3, I think 2.5. I would be in the 2.5 or 2 bracket. Yeah. Because I think that even because we'll compare to some of the other supports, a lot of their even the execution of heals is very imprecise, right? So it's like AoE in a general direction compared to Ana. Even if you are just up the behind of your tank,
Right.
occasionally you do have to still, like, you will have to heal a squishy target, and you will miss many shots and miss therefore value that your healer could have been giving. So I think 2.5 if I had
Yeah,
to
I think that's fair.
compromise with you.
I think that's fair. And then we get to the
Okay, so yours
ceiling.
is, yeah, yours is value ceiling. So go ahead.
This is tough. And again, we talk about value ceiling as being meta dependent. In other words, what heroes are strong? Are they good at this heroes? And this is where pro meta starts to come in, because like we have to be honest, like, is Ana a hero that you can play at a really, really high level? I mean, for a while she wasn't very good because we had a lot of more spammy style heroes, and so she wasn't as good. But I think in terms of value ceiling, if you play Ana remarkably well, like really, 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 really well, there haven't been too many metas where you weren't good. I think we saw a meta with double shield a lot, and that was where Ana's value ceiling was really, really low, because there was just perma shield, so you never got a sleep dart off, you never got a nade off, you didn't have enough, you didn't bring anything to the table in terms of shield break, so you did nothing. But we've seen a point where like shields have been nerfed, and you know, we're seeing a little more variety of heroes now, so maybe ceiling starts to rise again. Now I don't see Ana as necessarily a meta defining support, and she hasn't been for some time. And so that's what I have to think about. So she's like a hero that if you're like, let's put it this way, if you played Ana perfectly in really any meta in the last like 6-7 months, you would outvalue just about any other support, with maybe the exception of Zen. Just based off the nature of sleep darts and nades and things like that. But I don't think that's realistic to expect, even at somebody that's extremely competent in the hero. And then I'm also like, for like the metas that she was in, like it was just Zen was just better. Like we would just prefer a better Zen. So like I don't know. I don't actually rate her value ceiling is all that high right now. Like not low, but not high.
I would add to that as well that you said like there's not many supports who would get more value if you landed everything. But I also think to caveat that's also, I would say, value as an individual, whereas I think in what the team demands, I think this is why she's not been so meta defining, is that Bap, Brig, Zen have been the value of their existence is higher. Like having certain abilities that they could give you is already inherent value, right? Like the CC and the mass heal that Brig provides, the immortality the Bap provides, and obviously Zen just is very strong in both these terms, because the Discord is strong, but also if you're hitting every shot with Zen, that's very strong. So yeah, I think where she lacks, and this is probably why her value ceiling isn't as high, is that even when you're executing all parts of her kit well, it's not necessarily demanded in the sort of chess match that a meta often has, where it's like, okay, well, if they use this ability, then I'll use this ability. And we need this ability to counter that ability.
Agreed. And I think we'll talk more about like why I think Bap, Brig, and Zen have been meta for a while, especially in like the pro meta, because I have some big thoughts on that. And I think we'll talk. We'll end up revisiting Ana a little bit, because there's something that she desperately lacks that the other supports provide. But we'll go over that. So I think 2 or 2.5 I think is fair. If we compare it to the previous DPS here, 2.5 with Farah, you got a 3 with McCree. But again, that's a hero that you benefit if you have great mechanics with McCree. I mean, again, there's going to be a little bit more flexibility with where you can play him. With Ana, even then maybe the great mechanics won't compensate quite enough. So Ana feels very middle of the road for me with a lot of her grading.
Yeah, I think 2.5 is fair. Like I think it's fair, because I think, again, unlike McCree, who can headshot and he can kind of that ramps his output up, right? Where you suddenly you just 2-tap someone. Ana can only ever, even a well attempted nade can get shut down, right? Like even a nade that you threw at the perfect spot, because it's very unlikely that you're so close that they can't react. At the highest levels, they might find ways to counter it, even though there's very few cleanses in the game. So yeah, I think
agreed.
Yeah, I think 2.5 is fair.
Okay,
buffs, nerfs. We may have to briefly touch and then revisit this, because I think this, I'm curious to hear your assessment of like this whole Brig Bap Zen thing. And obviously it's very dangerous when we talk about buffs and nerfs at any time, because these are all relative. These are all very relative.
Right. I think the first thing before you give your grading is I want to make sure that we point out that like generally when we look at buffs, nerfs, we want to compare the value floor, value ceiling, the skill floor, skill ceiling. And initially you're like, hey, maybe Ana needs a buff at the higher ranks because her value ceiling and skill ceiling, there's a discrepancy. But that's when I think you kind of go, well, maybe, and then you go from there. So like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is that there's people on either side of this fence. Like I've seen, and people would, people. I don't mean people in Blizzard forums, because there's people in Blizzard forums asking for Bastion buffs.
Yeah.
But what I mean is people whose opinion I would respect, who both feel that Ana is weak and Ana is too strong. Because I think probably usually when people say she's too strong, it comes around the nade and the value of the nade, in that it's a unique ability in Overwatch that denies healing, and there's very, very few proper cleanses in the game.
Yeah.
So that's actually just a funny nature of how a certain type of ability, i.e. a cleanse, being lacking in Overwatch makes this ability very strong. I don't think inherently it's that strong if there were more cleanses or stuff like that. But I think on balance, probably fine, like a slight adjustment, but only really in the sense of bringing her power level up to par with the other supports. But I think I wouldn't be mad in the sense of like leaving her as is and bringing the other supports to her level, if that makes sense.
Right. No, I agree with that. I think unfortunately I kind of have to like segue a little bit because I'm gonna have to bring up a topic. So I think what we've seen, like why Bap has been so strong, is because of his sustain, but also because of his ability to compete with spam comps. But the reason why I think Brig and Zen in particular have been meta off and on for so long is because their ability to support DPS, and their ability to, through Harmony Orb, through Discord, through armor packs, by denying DPS with just your bash, etc. Like they contribute a lot to whatever their DPS are doing and what their DPS are doing on flanks and angles. And everybody who's been in my chat know I say those words more than I say and or it, right? They're just a part of my language. So you look at Ana and you go, okay, well, what does this hero really provide to DPS on flanks and angles? Now, Nano Boost is a huge, like if you nano your Tracer, it's just over. You nano your Genji, you nano your your Kree on an angle, whatever, it's over. But what else does she provide? If I've got a Tracer versus Tracer war, I don't want Ana. I want Brig or Zen. Or I want a Mercy pocket. Yeah. That's another one, Mercy as well, with damage boost in pocket. Like Ana can heal you, but nade is not very reliable there, and that's especially if the heroes are more mobile. Sleep Dart is completely unreliable there, and obviously you have to hit your shots in a squishy. And even then, a Harmony Orb plus Discord is going to do double. Like, there's no way that you can an pocketed Tracer is gonna beat a Tracer pocketed or Zen pocketed Tracer. So I think when people think about Ana in terms of like what things that she's strong at, I definitely think, like you said, the nade being a unique ability and on paper ridiculously strong. And even in practice. And then obviously I think she's also brought up when people start talking about the sustain creep. She was the first example of sustain creep in Overwatch before we had Bat, before we had Brig, before we had Moira. Like she was the first, compared to Zen, Mercy, Lucio, she just did so much more healing. But I think right now is we have heroes that are so very strong at controlling angles and flanks, and she doesn't do any of that. But at the same time, I'm not comfortable with wanting a buff for her because we start to have a sustain creep again. And I think the sustain creep / shield, the oppressiveness of shields a couple of years ago is why we ended up having overtuned damage, and then we added power creep across the board because we had goats, we had sustain comps, and then DPS had to be buffed to compensate, and then supports were nerfed, and now we have OP DPS in it. Like, I don't want to start that whole chain again. So I think Ana is like a good pick at all ranks. I don't think she's necessarily the best pick, but she's a good pick at all ranks, and she's just kind of in that niche right now. And I think maybe Overwatch 2, maybe another hero's release, we kind of see how things are affected. But I think that she still fills a niche enough that I don't know that I want a buff, or even a slight buff. I don't think I want to touch her right now.
Yeah, agreed. I think also thinking about it, the only reason we would even say that like about a buff is that she's not a not in any meta defining comp or any even strictly meta comp. But that's of course a what's the word? Like it's a fleeting metric, right? Like the meta can change, as you just kind of alluded to.
Exactly.
Circumstances can change, and then suddenly and this is exactly how, as you said, power creep ends up happening. Is you buff a hero because they're not in the meta. The buff doesn't necessarily help them get into the meta because it doesn't change why they are or are not in the meta. Like I don't think there's any number tune that will necessarily make Ana
No.
stronger, because it doesn't change the fact that of all the things you mentioned earlier about it doesn't change how she helps or doesn't help in a DPS duel. So no amount of number tweak in that sense
Right.
will change it. All it will do is potentially down the line, when it is Ana's time to become meta, it'll just make her even stronger
Exactly.
in that meta. So
Exactly. I think that's a really good way of looking at it.
So yeah, I think we can leave her as is. I think she is like, I will give the devs props on Ana, right? Like I think they did a good job making Ana.
Yeah.
Like that's why everyone likes her. I think mostly, you know, there's of course always going to be some annoyance, but I think
sure.
she's fun. We'll get to this in a second, but she's fun. She's well balanced. She's skillful. She's difficult, but can still be kind of accessed as well. So I think great job, devs.
Agreed. I think she's a well-designed hero, and I think that, like you said, directly translates into what we're talking about next, which is the fun against. And now this is where I actually think that, okay, so just so chat is clear, 4 is very fun to play against. In other words, nobody likes dying to anybody, but you're like, hey, at least it's a raw skill matchup. 1 is Bastion. You hate playing against Bastion, right? But I think with Ana, Nade can definitely be frustrating. It's one of the heroes that there isn't a lot of counterplay. I mean, there's counterplay it's like a Doomfist. You need to anticipate it to counter it a lot of the time, prevent it from even happening. You don't want to rely on everybody gets a Zarya bubble, right? And then I think, Sleep Dart is definitely frustrating. Any long CC is frustrating, but it is skill based. So I think, I don't know. I don't think you can put her below a 3 for fun against.
Yeah, I think, yeah. No, go ahead. You finish your point.
No, that was it for me.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I mean, again, nobody is fun to die to, right? Like, everybody you could probably point to and say, well, that's unfun. I didn't like dying there. But I think if you're in a one-on-one against Ana, it's about as, skillful a matchup as you're going to get, right? Because you know exactly how to outplay. I think the only people who would be mad are tank mains potentially, and Roadhog mains in particular, who she obviously shits on all day long.
Yes.
But
yes.
Yeah, I think the only people who are actually going to be actively mad are tanks, because otherwise, if you're a DPS, anytime you think about encountering Ana and one of those Chateau Guillard death matches, it's like you know what the conditions are, right? So you either outplay her or she sleeps you, and that's the end of the duel. So it's like I think she's more fun to duel against than Genji. Genji I think was the highest DPS we gave, which I think is I still stand by. I think losing to Genji, you understand why you lost.
Yeah.
So I think 3.5. I think, to be honest,
I think that's fair. Again, we're gonna have a hard time finding a hero that's more like we talked about. I think we cheated and said maybe Winston is a hero that would be a 4 maybe, because he's very skillful and very easy to punish. But I don't know many other supports that are gonna be easier or more fun to play against. Okay, so that was 1. 2.5, 3.5, 2.5, 2.5. That seems fair enough. I think she's one of the heroes. The problem with so many of these supports is people were talking to me about Brig and what can we do to finally get Brig out of meta? What can we finally do? And my thought process was well, why are we that concerned with Brig being out of meta? We have 1, 2, 3, 7 supports, 4 of which can be cataloged as, or 3 which at least can be cataloged as main healers, right? And then Mercy's kind of a hybrid. There's almost always going to be Lucio, Brig, or Zen in the meta. Lucio's not been very meta for a while, but there's just so few supports that everyone's going to say, oh, it's always Bap, it's always Brig, it's always Zen, it's always Mercy, it's always more. There's not many options here. So I think supports in general, it's going to be fun to discuss, but there's always that caveat that's kind of looming overhead of there are less than half. Less than half the number of supports as there are DPS. So, and I think until we start to flesh out the numbers more, Overwatch 2 or hopefully before then maybe, it is going to be very difficult for some supports to not feel like they're picked 24/7 just because there aren't any other options.
Yeah, exactly. Agreed. I think it's the same kind of situation with tanks as well, where it's there's such a short number that the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? I guess the philosophy that we can have with how a support is how a support comp is created is very narrow right now. Like you said, it's always going to be one of 3 people who's the sort of main support, and there's another one who's the off support or the flex support.
Right.
And until there's a much more large variety of options we can pick from, it will always end up stagnating very quickly.
Yep. Agreed. Okay, on to the BAP. So skill floor again designating what we expect a base level BAP to do. we compare this with Ana 2.5, we compare this with Bap with 2.5. This one's tough for me because you have such a glut of healing with your AoE right clicks, with your, your lamp can be considered a sustainability in itself. Obviously, your shift, which they did nerf, thankfully. I think that was a big one they nerfed not too long ago. But he does provide a lot of healing. Probably the most healing, at least sustained over a fight, over any support, including Moira. So when I compare like skill floor of Bap, I'm thinking, okay, can continually pump out heals, can put out some shield pressure. I think the one tricky aspect of him is I don't think his ult is as easy to use as Nano Boost in lower ranks. I think it's very easy to get very little value out of Window if it's used improperly. Obviously, I think having a gun is makes things a little bit trickier. Right click, he has the same issue as Ana, where you have to have some level of mechanics to like be able to heal properly, whether it's the projectile heal or the damage with his gun. And then I don't think shift is particularly hard to use, but lamp is kind of hit or miss, right? I don't think lamp is obnoxiously hard to use, but it can be tricky to use. So I'm unsure. Like I'm kind of like fleshing this out, but like he strikes me as somehow middle of the road again, similar to Ana in terms of skill floor. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards like a 2 because I feel like, again, I feel like there's like two distinct BAPs here. There's the healing output is incredible ease of use because it's like a generous right click in an area.
True. Yeah.
You shift, and then of course, if we're not talking necessarily optimal use of lamp, but if you just want to use lamp because you panicked, you got dove, or someone went critical on your screen, you chuck that ability down, and it's a pretty generous AoE. Yep. Even if it gets killed, it has a slight lingering effect. So to get like I think some level of like access to his kit on the healing side is actually really easy, but on the offensive side is much more difficult. Like his gun is tricky. It's got like a unique recoil. It's like the triple burst, and they all like jump up.
Yep.
Amp matrix again, like you said. I think particularly in the metal ranks, people like nobody's necessarily going to be grouped up enough to use the amp matrix, and if you're trying to use it like for a solo play, again you then have to put your aim boots on and actually hit the shots. So yeah, I think 2 maybe, because I don't think maybe 2.5. I don't know. I think 2 is what I'm leaning towards, but I could be convinced to 2.5 as well.
So I like what you said about lamp, because one of the things I always coach about with my lower rank BAPs is don't overthink your lamp too much. Just use it when somebody's low. Like use it to sustain. If your Ryan goes in and he's critical and you're not gonna be able to heal up, just lamp him. It's better to just use it early than it is to wait for the perfect opportunity. So I think that definitely makes the lamp in terms of the floor not as that difficult to use. But I feel like I need to think this through and find a way to where I can justify his ultimate being either easier or harder to use. Because I'm like you, I'm on the fence here. Because I'm like, okay, is his ult really, really hard to use in lower ranks, or is it like really easy? I'm kind of on the fence, and so everything is just hitting dab in the middle, but it definitely feels as if he should be a little easier than Ana. But I don't know if it's a little enough.
I think so, because again, like I think again at the floor level, you're just looking for your healers to heal, right? Mm-hmm. And again, the generous right click AoE just makes that a lot easier than even if you're just hitting tanks. But it is harder with Ana, and I think that you can also just amp matrix and amp heals if you wanted to. Yeah. So yeah, I think if we're comparing to Ana, that I would probably give him like a 0.5 less. Yeah. I think also we didn't even mention that there's the exo boots, which allows your positioning to be weaker as well. Whereas Ana has to kind of find a spot and stay there. True. Bap can kind of go up and down. It's an escape as well, and particularly on certain maps like Numbani or whatever, right, you can afford to kind of like panic drop and then jump back up anyways. Right. We also have to keep in mind too that like obviously these two are very similar in description, but we're kind of leaking into value floor a little bit here. But we should be sticking more with the skill flow. In other words, if you look at shift, it's not a hard ability to use or understand. We look at lamp, it's a medium ability to use and understand. His gun, his right click, neither of those are very hard to understand. And then his ultimate is the same thing. It's pretty straightforward. You do a lot of damage. So I think it's like maybe the hero is a little weaker than Ana, or as equal as Ana, or stronger than Ana. But right now, when I compare
trying to figure out how to use nade and sleep dart and how to position yourself as Ana, comparing to doing the same things with your abilities and positioning as BAP, I just think BAP is easier. I think BAP is easier to fundamentally understand. And we could talk about like whether that leads to BAP being better than Ana or not. Like Ana might be a better hero than BAP, but for certain, BAP feels easier to understand at a base level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for that reason, I would say 2.
Yeah.
No.
And in terms of ceiling,
skill ceiling. Again, there's a lot of, I think when it comes to something who's like a meta hero like BAP, I think there's obviously an element of understanding your role in the meta as well, which is important. The timings of like when you're using your amp matrix, when you're using your lamp, that kind of stuff becomes a little bit more important. I suppose, again, Ana being a little bit more individualistic in how she fits in, makes that slightly different. But I still think that there's not a huge discrepancy, I don't think, in the skill floor and the skill ceiling here. Like, I think once you get general competence with BAP, it's not that much of a big jump to refine it. That's my opinion.
I think with ceiling, you're looking at somebody whose gunplay might be a little bit more impactful than Ana, in terms of like the right click and his damage, like getting the combos correctly done. But at the same time, you're a lot of time with BAP, not all the time, but a lot of time with BAP, you're also shooting shields. That's kind of where your pressure is easiest to do without taking your sightlines off of the core. I look at him, but mechanically both are difficult, BAP and Ana, at the ceiling. You look at Lamp, it's not an easy ult to use. But then I compare, and then Window is probably comparable to Nano in terms of difficulty. But I think the real kicker for me, and the reason why I think I'm going to argue for a 3 instead of a 3.5 of Ana, is that Ana has 2 difficult cooldowns to use and has less flexibility with her positioning. BAP has 1 difficult cooldown to use and is more flexible with this positioning. And so in terms of like actually min-maxing, like with BAP, like when I coach a BAP, when I coach an Ana has to put a lot more thought into how she positions. To BAP, a little less so. BAP has to be thinking about really 1 ability. Ana has to think about 2. So to me, in terms of like how difficult it is to min-max, I just think it's more so with Ana, because Shift is just a stupid easy ability to use. It doesn't stop people from wasting it. It doesn't stop people from misusing it, even in higher ranks, but it's not hard to understand and it's not hard to min-max at all. And I think that's the big gap between me and BAP. And I don't think Lamp, even in the higher ranks, is significantly harder, or even, it's probably more comparable with like Nade. It's not like, oh, Lamp is just 10 times harder than any other cooldown. It's really not. Even in like competitive pro play, like it just requires some communication and some preparation, and then it's comparable to any other defensive cooldown. So I think a 3 is definitely where I would place him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the other thing I'd add to that as well is that even once you understand them, there's not a difficulty of execution in the way that sleep is a difficult to execute as well. Like, it's not just that holding your sleep is an important thing, but then hitting it is different, as opposed to holding your lamp is one thing, but then using it is like, well, it's not.
Yeah,
unless you're really Kobeing it downtown, it's not
right. There's a little mechanical thing with like Lamp, like actually placing it in corners, but again, it's not
like around the corner stuff. But again, I think that's like, it's quite generous how you can do it.
Right.
Like,
it's not as big of a deal. Like I said, it's just a big write-off for me that he has just such an easy cooldown to use. Like, it's just so much easier, and it's not compensated in really any other category when you compare him to Ana. And again, if we look at like skill ceiling and we compare him to like skill ceiling to like a little lower than Sombra, a little higher than Soldier, on par with Pharah, I think that makes sense to me. Looking more at the DPS cast, he's a little lower than Doomfist. He's right on par with Ashe. Like, that logic kind of carries through for me, I think.
I see him on par with like an Ashe. I think that's fair.
Yep.
Thing.
Okay. Value floor. So value floor, again, like, just how much does the hero get right off the bat? Like, you're playing at the skill floor, how much are you getting done with this hero? I think like this is where, like, the mass sustain that he had previously, the ridiculously broken lamp, I think that was like definitely a big deal. I mean, those things have been nerfed a little bit since then, but I think he still provides just a lot of value just by existing. In terms of Ana, we talk about like how Ana can get a lot of value just by pumping heals up her Reinhardt's butt. Well, how is that different from BAP? I think the only difference really is Nano Boost is going to be a little bit easier to get initial value out of compared to Window. but the sustain, it's even easier for Bap to pump heals up his Ryan's butt, you know. And I think this is where I'm a little torn, because I clearly see Nano as being the superior ultimate to get easy value out of, at least right off the bat. But at the same time, it's unquestionable that his sustain is easier to do than Ana. In terms of like shift, right click damage, it's just easier to just do stuff with Bap than it is with Ana in that aspect. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think again what makes this a little bit tricky to judge is that again his supportive value or like his healing value is very easy to access compared, but his damage output is harder to access than Ana's. I think like with Nade, you can kind of accidentally get value with it. Like I said earlier, like you could throw it at your team and accidentally purple someone, right? Or like, you know, you throw it at your tank and there's another tank brawling them, it accidentally purples them. Or even just generally throwing it into an area, it gets a couple purples or whatever. So having a value offensively and in a quote unquote carry way, which is again, I suppose important to consider when you think about Diamond and below, is that if you're looking for, well, how do I climb with a support? Well, with Ana, it'll be easier to do those value offensive plays as opposed to Bap, who actually, again, you have to have the mechanical ability. If you actually want to frag out as Bap, there's no like easy way to do it. There's no like crutch that you can rely on. You have to just hit your shots. So that's what complicates it for me. I'm trying to consider it.
I'm gonna look at DPS here. I mean, certainly lower than Torb. Torb we decided was a 3. I'm trying to find other 2.5s here. Ara was a 2. 2.5 is a McCree.
I think 2.5 probably is fair if we gave Ana 2.5 as well.
Yeah.
In the sense that if I'm picturing like a plat-ish game, would I necessarily see huge levels of difference in output from a Ana versus a Bap player at that rank? Probably not. Not if they're equal skill ability. Probably not. I think the character's lamp may provide higher value than anything in Ana's kit, but I think the hero themselves probably, the player themselves probably are having a similar level of impact.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And I think, like I said, the big thing here is like the lack of nano boost in terms of like that floor is missed. Because Nano is one of those ults that just is very, very oppressive.
Yeah, you can't get it wrong.
Yeah, it's very hard to get it wrong. We won't.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate.
When the Lucio flies in between.
Lucio's
himself.
Very hard. Very hard. Okay. Okay. Value ceiling. What are your thoughts in this one?
Well, I mean, I'm curious on your thoughts on this in particular, because obviously this is where the high tier, the meta stuff comes in. And he has been annoyingly in the meta, I guess, and not for me personally, because I don't reach the tiers where I'm like up against top 500s and GMs, but I know all the sort of top 500 streamers and stuff, they're all very, very upset with like how BAP operates and how Lamp is obnoxious and how it kind of, if I was to channel my inner Samito, how it removes counterplay, like it punishes, playmaking. So there's obviously a lot of value to be had at the highest level from BAP, but I'm curious as to your take on how he stands right now with the sort of current patch of things.
I think like with Ana, where we kind of saw a dip in skill ceiling to value ceiling because the hero was just not as meta, I think with BAP, we see not a dip at all. I think he's a hero that's good in the meta simply because the AoE sustain in brawlier style comps is very useful. His window is also a little more useful in higher ranks. It requires a little more coordination that's going to be available at the higher ranks. And then also, honestly, just the ability to poke with your weapon at a more relevant rate than Ana, especially without having to really drop your sustain too much. Like the thing with Ana is, if I'm shooting the enemies, I'm not healing my teammates. And with BAP, you can essentially do both. And so, I mean, having a really, really good BAP, especially someone who's communicative with Lamp, like you're going to get a lot of value out of that, And there's always ways of like, you can min-max your things in that. So you look at a hero that has a relatively high skill ceiling and who's been, if not meta, a good hero for a long time. And you can't put him below a 3. You can't put him below a 3. I think the one thing that hurts him a little bit is the fact that, unlike Briggs and Mercy, he cannot support DPS as much, but he does have some sort of damage on angles, and more importantly, he has poke. Like he has reasonable poke. Like that's the thing, is like you can, you can't help your tracer win a duel maybe all that much, but you can poke out an enemy segment. You can poke out an enemy diva. You can poke out an Orisa shield. You can poke down a Rhine shield. You can all of these different things that you can like utilize and enable through that positioning. So I look at every part of his kit. Lamp is more valuable in higher ranks than it is in lower ranks. It has bigger impact. His damage has a lot bigger impact on higher ranks than it does in lower ranks, because lower ranks are very tunneled on usually just healing, right up the Rhine butt. No, we talked about that. Window for certain has more value in higher ranks than it does in lower ranks because of to an also extent the mobility as well. Like in lower ranks, nobody uses no mobility. Nobody gets like anything out of it. In higher ranks, people get a lot of value out of it. So you're seeing a lot of his parts of his kit, at least 3 or 4 parts of his kit that kind of come to fruition. We look at Ana, Sleep, and Nade. Those are really the 2 ones that stand out. To a lesser extent, mechanics. Nano actually becomes harder at higher ranks. It's not better. But Sleep and Nade are the only 2 things that we see as being better at higher ranks than they are at lower ranks. But overall, like that's about it. With BAP, it's the damage, it's the mobility, it's the window, it's the lamp. All of those things are better in higher ranks than they are in lower ranks. They have more impact. So I think 3 is the score I give.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Actually, while you were saying, I sort of had an interesting thought, and I'd love to sort of discuss this with you. It's a little bit of a segue, but I think it's relevant because I think that we saw the previews at BlizzCon, and we saw kind of the direction I think the devs want to take Overwatch 2.
Yes.
And that's sort of a more brawly world, right? I think they basically want it to be a bit more of a deathmatchy style game, right? They're trying to take shields out. They're trying to increase the mobility of DPS, and then as proxy, they're trying to make supports more self-sustainable, right? Giving them the Mercy passive. And it was interesting when you said where he lacks compared to a Briggs and Mercy is he can't enable his DPS in these duels. And I wonder if like sort of main healers, as it were, will suffer in that world of Overwatch 2 comparatively. Because right now, Bap, Ana, and Moira, their jobs in the team is sort of, okay, well, they're the tank-centric ones. And the Briggs, the Mercy, and the Zens are your Lucio, or your DPS-centric ones, right? They're the ones who help the DPS out. And I wonder if in a world where deathmatching is more the norm, and shielding is like near non-existent, right? They're taking shields, like really toning them down. I wonder if main healers will suffer. What do you think?
Oh, I definitely think so. I think that's a very fair take. Like, I think you look at I think the other thing that you have to keep in mind as well is that more so that this hurts BAP and Moira more so than the amount of kids. Like, I think the thing with main healers is that it's less so about the fact that they're designed to output a lot of healing, but also they don't have a lot of mobility, right? You even look at a hero like BAP, and he's pretty limited with where he can play. Like, he has range with his gun, but range healing with BAP is misery, especially with mobile heroes. And the same thing goes with Moira, and the same thing to an extent goes with Ana. They're very like tunneled in what they can contribute to, and if they can't shoot it, that's about all they can do. Whereas Briggs Zen, obviously not particularly mobile heroes, but they can have big impacts on things that are a million miles away from them. The armor pack, right? The Harmony Orb, the Discord Orb. Same thing with Mercy. She can be anywhere at any time, in fact, impacting any duel. And so when you think about maybe the brawlier style deathmatch, kind of messy, chaotic style of Overwatch that we might be seeing, having a hero that just kind of sits in a location and just and pumps out healing, maybe not as effective, right? You would want a more fluid, hybrid, less healer, more supporter style of support. Somebody who can kind of impact anywhere where it's needed, right? Similar reasoning why in that style of, if that's where Overwatch 2 is going to go, a hero like a Reaper or Mei might have less impact than a hero like a Tracer or a Genji or an Echo, right? Based off their ability to kind of like quickly adjust their positioning, contribute where it's needed, and then, move on. So you look at somebody like BAP and kind of who we're talking about right now, and it's like, this hero is very good when he's got everything kind of like within control, like lamp, shift. Everything kind of has to rotate around where he can see. But if things start to get really messy and devolved, he's going to struggle a little bit. And I think you brought up Moira and Ana. I think they also fall into that category as well.
Yeah, I think that's. I wonder. I'm sure the devs have sort of considered it, but whether they will adjust the heroes accordingly, or if that's something that like is not on the forefront of their mind, right? It might be one of those things where Overwatch 2 drops and we see the power levels drop of these heroes, and then the devs have to adjust accordingly.
Yep.
because I do think that otherwise, yeah, there's probably some fun. Like I don't see BAP working very well in that world, like you said, like especially since they reduced the AOE of his right click as well.
Yep.
It just feels like it's actually quite imprecise at any sort of medium distance.
Yep. No, I agree. And I think we're starting to see that world kind of come into play whether we want to or not. Even in current iterations of Overwatch, shields have been nerfed. Heroes like Tracer and Sombra are strong. Ball is strong. Echo is strong. Pharmacy is relatively strong. And so in the pro metas, like we've seen again and again and again, metas that favor angles and space and mobility and even when it comes to like brawler style metas, which are kind of popping up in the pro level, it's brawler style metas with flexibility, with mobile heroes that can also contribute. So that's why heroes like Moira, even though she's received some buffs, some nerfs, she's about the same power level that she was about a year and a half ago. Like she's completely fallen out of favor, because as people's understanding of the game has grown, maybe they don't even understand why, but they're making better decisions. Heroes that are just about pumping healing in one location are just quickly falling out of favor. So it just, anyway, it's interesting.
Yeah. Any sort of comment on whether you personally like that or not, or?
I don't think it's up to me to really like. I think that's just how Overwatch should be played. Like, I think something that's I hammer home over and over again, whether it's silver and gold VODs or whether it's pro analysis, is that the control of map is Overwatch. That's just Overwatch and how it needs to be played, doing everything at the same time from good positions. And so as that starts to evolve and people start to understand that more and more, that's just that the heroes that favor that more are going to be stronger and stronger and stronger. And I don't think we're going to see that change, because fundamentally Overwatch is designed around maps with high grounds and flanks and angles. And as long as heroes with high mobility aren't complete trash, like literally trash, the heroes that can exploit that are going to be strong. That's why Widow is never a complete throw pick, almost ever, and has been for meta after meta after meta. If it's a good map for Widow, she will be played. And I think to a lesser extent, Tracer recently has also been there. Heroes that have a lot of mobility, have a lot of range, are also heroes that can fully exploit the map, especially if it's good for them. So,
yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was always interesting to get different people's takes on situations. Yeah. So yeah, that's a very insightful take. Thanks.
No worries. But now we have buffs and nerfs, and
buffs and nerfs. I think so. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you go ahead. You clearly had a thought. I'm going to be sitting thinking.
I was just going to say that the only thing that comes immediately to mind is that, and I know this because I talk to other content creators a lot, is that these two are kind of mixed in that people want a nerf because immortality is deemed unfun to play against. And I think that's probably the main area of frustration that people have with BAP, is the nature of immortality potentially being uncounterable when it's around a corner. So I think if people wanted something changed, it'd probably be the nature of how immortality works. How do you feel about that?
I think that's fair. I mean, Shift is not exactly a very difficult ability to use, which I always hate abilities that are super easy to use, but I don't have a problem with Shift that much. They've nerfed it properly. His damage is skillful. His right click is a lot of healing. Maybe that's something that we look at eventually, but they did also nerf that not too long ago. They have nerfed Immortality Field a couple times, and there is counterplay to it, but it is one of the more annoying or difficult to counterplay abilities. I don't know. I think you could probably realistically see BAP get a slight nerf, especially since they recently buffed his ultimate and buffed his damage as well, if I remember correctly. Like, his ultimate's a lot wider, but I think his damage or fire rate is damage is a little higher. So yeah, I could see a nerf to Immortality Field. I guess it's just like, whenever we nerf or buff something, we always kind of have to look at like, what's the flavor of that hero? Why do you play that hero? You look at Mercy. You play Mercy because she's oppressive at winning duels and she's extremely mobile. You look at Zenyatta, again, very similar to supporting DPS. He's very fragile, but he supports DPS and has high damage output. Moira, just a heal bot. Even Moira, who's bad, at least has a signature. BAP has kind of been considered a heal bot with poke right now. But also Immortality Field. So I think if you see Immortality Field reworked, nerfed, whatever, we'd have to see how much it impact like his role as a hero, and maybe you compensate by increasing his damage somehow, or maybe decreasing range but increasing fire rate or something like that. But I would be totally down for a immortality field nerf. But again, nothing crazy. I don't think any support right now deserves a big buff or nerf until we get more of the cast flushed out and we get more and more heroes to get a better idea of like what is actually needed.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's actually interesting because I'm in the process of trying to create a content creator patch. So what I'm trying to do is
that's a good idea.
Make an Overwatch 2 ready patch, basically.
Yep.
So I'm in contact with some, the geniuses of the workshop, and we're going to try and implement like all the role passives, change what we know about Reinhardt, and then according to that, I'm trying to create a patch that we can play on. Like I can gather a bunch of content creators, we can play together.
That'd be sick.
And so just have fun with what an Overwatch 2 world would look like, while potentially giving the devs our say as well and saying,
sure,
okay, well, this is what we changed. We like this. We didn't like that.
It's an unofficial beta. That's funny. That's a good idea.
Yeah. So in that world, currently what I've done, I'm sort of trying to do a working update as I sort of make this. Currently what I've done is give Immortality Field a cast time of the same as Hanzo Dragon, which is 1.5 seconds.
Ooh.
So the idea is, because I agree with you, I think there's been a lot of suggestions to change Immortality to be a damage reduction ability. I've seen this suggestion quite a few times.
Yeah.
Rather than an immortality thing. But again, I think that is the identity of the hero. They want him to have that ability to make someone immortal, and like that's his whole shtick.
Right.
So I think the damage reduction could be another hero down the line. So I feel like the way to maybe make immortality fair is give it that little punishment, because I think people feel like there's no punishment for immortality field, but having a cast time might.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I think, it would also put it. It would reduce it would make its counterplay. You'd have to be more specific with what it actually counterplays as well. Because you'd have to like be more decisive with it ahead of time. It wouldn't be it's immortality field instantly. I think that's an interesting idea. I'm curious to see how that plays out. So I think maybe a negative 0.5. Maybe. Nothing major. Do you want to kind of explain how we did the buffs nerfs thing? Because it's definitely different from the other grading.
Yeah, so we're never going to be very extreme. I don't think there's any hero that we've been like, -4, get this guy the fuck out of here. Yeah. Usually we just kind of... I think everything has been in the range of -1 to 1, right? I don't think anyone was more than that. In fact, nobody was more than... No, Echo was -1.
Echo was -1, that's the only one.
Genji was 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically it's just like 1 indicates a buff, basically. Anything positive indicates a buff, anything negative indicates a nerf, and asterisk indicates some sort of rework.
Right.
So in the case of BAP, -0.5, slight adjustment, maybe just bring him down a little bit.
Yeah.
But more so, I think it'd be interesting to see, the cast time with Immortality might help people's frustration with it.
For sure. And then speaking along those lines, fun against. This is transitions nicely.
Yeah, I personally don't have a huge amount of hatred for BAP, but if we're speaking for the community, there is a lot of frustration against Immortality in particular, and I think also the IMAX Theater amp matrix.
Yeah, for sure. I think you also shift is one of those abilities that's a little frustrating to use against. Like if you ever pressure an Ana, as Genji or as Tracer or Sombra, and you force nade, you're like, sweet, we got nade. You know what I'm saying? Or even Brig, we forced bash. She had to get healing from our other support, I forced amp on Lucio, or I forced heal orb. Like even more with BAP, we forced shift, and you're like, okay, so what? It doesn't really feel like a particularly expensive ability, so it's like it's a little frustrating to play against shift as a flanker. I know. Because it does feel like he's impossible to kill. Like Lamp isn't even something that they generally need against flankers a lot of the time, unless it's like a hard dive. So, obviously the immortality field is definitely an annoying ability to use against his ability to just shift himself to safety and then jump away to safety is definitely. We look at Ana and we say, 3.5. If I would compare that more with like a Torb probably, or even lower.
Yeah.
I think you could realistically say BAP is in the 2.5 or 2 range for me.
I think 2. I think Symmetra probably. I think the Symmetra tier of.
Yeah.
inoffensive, I guess, but
Yeah.
not also irksome at
Yes.
times.
I think that's a good way to describe it.
Okay, so that's Bap. Then we
Oh
head on.
boy.
Oh boy, oh
Oh
boy.
gosh, this is gonna be one of the two worst ones because I feel like Mercy's gonna be up there as well. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, this is I guess this is gonna be rough. So I started off with Skill Floor and Bap.
Yeah,
This
I
is
think you
your
started
turn.
Bap. So skill floor. How difficult is it? See, the thing is, so I the discussions around Brig are usually, oh my god, this hero is so easy to use and gives so
Yeah.
much value by existing. But I think again that's a very top high rank centric view. I actually think at the lowest ranks it's very difficult to get Brig right.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying like as difficult as Ana or anything like that,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think it's like it isn't like you pick her up and you win,
Yep.
which is kind of how it feels sometimes for I know the highest ranked players. They feel like, well, just her being in the game denies me from being able to do XYZ things. But that's because
Mm-hmm.
they know that the enemy Brig isn't a moron. So if they do this thing, she will do this thing. Whereas again, at the
Yep.
metal ranks, those rules go out the window. Not everybody isn't operating by the same playbook, right?
Yep.
So
Yep. Yep.
I think that it's actually a little bit more difficult than people think.
I think I'm gonna have some hot takes in this one that are gonna surprise some people because I think a lot of people's opinions on Brig are wildly outdated. Um,
Hmm.
I think that on release, Brig, like, okay, so here's a problem with Brig and Mercy. It's coincidental that the two heroes that are hated the most by just the general DPS community, and that are also defended the most, are also two of the heroes that have almost without debate were the most powerful heroes in the history of Overwatch at one point in time. Release Brig was probably the most powerful hero in the history of Overwatch, and second to that was early Moth meta Mercy with the zoom healing 60 HPS res. I then press Q. Well, first off, insta res. Then I press Q for Valk. I get another res, and then 10 seconds later I get another res, and then Falcons, and then I get another res. And all of this with the extra speed that she had, and so like there was just so like Brig and Mercy at those individual times were the most obnoxious, oppressive heroes in the history of Overwatch, barring none. Even really early release Sigma was not that bad. And so I think that leaves people with a really bad taste in their mouth, and a lot of people just hate the hero after that, regardless of whether they hardly even represent that at all. So I think like you look at a Brig on release, and there's a memes on release, even in the first like 6 months to a year. Oh, this person was plat or gold, and they all of a sudden swap to Brig, and now they're masters. Like, what a stupid hero!
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just exist, nobody can kill you. Your Raleigh is probably one of the most powerful ultimates in the game, et cetera, et cetera. But now we've seen her HP chunked by 50. Raleigh has been nerfed. It's still very, very strong, but significantly nerfed. The whole bugged armor is gone. The heroes in self-healing and group healing has been reduced as well. Bash damage is a lot less, just basically a little bit chipped away. And now you have a hero that I think she's one of the, like Diva, is like one of the heroes that is just played so terribly wrong. Like even at Bap and Ana kind of get, even if you're bad at Bap and Ana, you kind of get an idea of what you're supposed to do. Most Brig players play it completely wrong. Just completely
That's a good
wrong.
point, yeah.
And I think that's part of the reason why I actually think her skill floor is higher than a lot of the other support heroes. I would go as far to say her skill floor is at least 2.5. Or maybe even 3. And I think that's going to be a hot take for a lot of you guys. But have you ever played with a gold or plat Brig? They have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea what they're doing. Like, a lot of times people play like, oh, I'm a brawl hero. No, you're not. You're going to die instantly. Your shield is paper. You have 200 HP. You basically do no self-healing at all. You have very limited mobility. And I think a lot of Brig players are still stuck in that mindset, and they die and die and die and die. So I think, and that along with the fact that like she's reworked now in terms of whip shot cooldown, to where you need to be hitting your whip shots, you need to be pocketing your DPS, you need to be positioning yourself properly, because positioning does matter now with Brig, because you can and will get killed frequently if you position improperly. And even things like armor packs, like it's important that you're using your armor packs correctly. If you are spamming armor packs in your tanks, you're doing it incorrectly, and you're gonna give your team a really hard time. So I think skill floor with Brig is I think 2.5 at least, and I know a lot of people are gonna be surprised at that.
No, I think that's fair. I think again, yeah, it's like the Dio problem is a very good way of relating it, because I do think that these are certain heroes which they seem intuitive, but they are not, and people think they know, but they don't. It's kind of like you think you want it, but you don't. It's like you think you know it, but you don't. And I think that it's just evidenced by the fact that I just don't even see gold and plat Briggs, let alone seeing them play well.
Yeah.
I just don't even see them because people, I think, they feel so helpless and clueless on the hero.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think 2.5 is fair. I think, yeah, I can see your argument for like a 3, but
we're scared of the DPS mains. They're gonna come to
I
our
just
house.
think that it's like it would just cause so much. Can you imagine the shit if we said that Brig was a more skillful floor entry hero than Nana?
Yep, I was just thinking that.
I think also, to be fair, I think there should be some mediation for the fact that the community misunderstanding doesn't necessarily make the hero inherently harder. It's just that's the community's problem. Like we've done something wrong there.
That's true. I would say if I'm coaching a player, they're gonna pick up Brig about as fast as they pick up Ana. If I'm not coaching a player, then they're gonna be a little slower. But that's, like you said, it's the community perception that's flawed. And so it might take some time for it to come around. Like, what was a hero that was like Echo, for example? Everyone was like, oh, Echo in release. Man, this hero was really hard, like really tricky. No, she was just completely busted. People were just too stupid to actually know how to play her correctly. And then once people figured out, they're like, man, this hero's not even that hard to get value out of. And so I think Brig might be in the same level. Like, people are really, ideas and concepts are sticky. People are going to not really see Brig correctly for might take some time before people actually figure out that Brig is supposed to be played differently than how you've been playing it for the last year and a half. But that doesn't necessarily make her harder. It just means that people just need to get their heads out of the dirt and figure it out. So I think that's fair.
I think Ana was like this as well on release. I remember that people just shied away from her really heavily until they kind of tweaked her a little bit.
Agreed.
Where people just needed to figure out, okay, this is what the hero does.
Agreed.
Which is, I guess, something like sometimes we've been unused to that sometimes, particularly with recent releases, because like when Sigma came out, literally like the week he came out, everyone was playing in Overwatch League, and it's like, well, something is wrong here.
Yeah,
heroes have gone straight into the meta.
Same thing with Brig. It was like, oh, all of a sudden everybody, well, actually to a little bit of a lesser extent, but yeah, same. Well, Valk Mercy for sure, but yeah, I think 2.5 is fair. Ceiling. I think 2.5 as well, to be perfectly honest. I think this one's pretty easy for me. She's not an easy hero to play at the higher ranks. I actually think that, you said like, oh, she's easier in higher ranks. Well, people in higher ranks understand her role better, but she's still an incredibly easy hero to punish now. Which again is weird because people are not used to that. Like, what, Brig? You can't dive, Brig. You really can. You can now. Her self-healing is very low. She doesn't, she's not incredibly lethal. It requires good positioning. You do need to be hitting your packs on the right targets at the right time, and like there is some mechanical play to her. Like, you need to hit your whip shots. You need to know your combos. You need to be hitting the bash. You need to be blocking ball slam. That was a big one for a while in the Brig Zen meta. As a Brig, you need to be blocking the ball slam so you don't get launched up in the air and get killed, or your Zen for that matter. So there was a lot of little counterplay. Playing around pulse bomb is another one, because Brig is a primary pulse bomb target in pros. So you need to know how to block pulse bomb, how to drop pulse bomb off of your shield and then block it afterwards. Know how to, tracers will 180 pulse bomb you. You need to 180 block that, right? And so there's just a lot of little things with Brig that I think, like, she's certainly not a BAP level in terms of mechanics. She's certainly not an Ana level in terms of mechanics and cooldown usage, but positioning is important. There is some mechanics, and also knowing your role is not as intuitive. In fact, it's even harder, arguably, knowing your role than it is with like a BAP. So I think a solid 2.5 for me in terms of ceiling.
Yeah, I think so. I think no contest there. I think usually when a hero is like mechanically less demanding, it often means that there is an understanding that's required of them, and I think that's probably true of some of these heroes lower down as well, where BAP and Ana being so mechanically demanding, it's a lot more visceral when you are or aren't having impact. Like, it's obvious if you're hitting your shot, you're having an impact. If you're missing, you're not having an impact. Whereas with Brig, I think this is again why people sometimes get lost, is that understanding what you're supposed to be doing isn't as clear because there isn't as much visual feedback to tell you did the right thing.
Right. Right. I think that's the other thing too, is like people will think heroes are underpowered because they don't see what they're doing. They don't feel the satisfaction of hitting that shot or landing that nade, but the armor pack on your tracer won you the fight. You know, hit procking that Inspire won you the fight. You blocking that slam won you the fight. So it's, I mean, it's for a while, like that's why Mercy kind of felt unintuitive as well, because he didn't feel like you had direct impact. And, you know, we can talk about hero design and all, but it you know, for sure, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, value floor then. Again, so this is another one that's been very controversial. Obviously, for the longest time, Brig has, the whole argument around Brig has been that picking her is too much value in of itself, in that it kind of, the pick itself denies certain comps from existing. Do you still feel this is the case?
No, not at all. Not at all. And certainly not at lower ranks. No. I think value floor, she's one of the lower value floor heroes.
I agree. So actually, you know, again, a while back when I did my sort of plat meta tier list, I had Brig in the category, the second lowest category, as less value, basically, as in she gets less value for normal players than she would otherwise. Because I think, it's very easy, as we said earlier, to not do anything, basically. Or like, one thing I see very frequently is just like, they stand right next to the Reinhardt, the enemy Reinhardt comes closer, they bash forwards, miss the bash, and then just die. Like, one swing or something, you know, like, because everybody's like, oh, well, there's a Brig just bashed into my face. I guess we'll kill her. I think it's actually very easy to not get any value as Brig.
I agree. And I think, I mean, Rally is definitely an ultimate that's easier to get value out of when you compare it to other support ultimates. Maybe not quite as easy as just Nano, but it is a very, very strong ultimate. So I think that's the one redeeming factor with value floor, is that it's not particularly hard to use Rally, and it does have a big impact. But I think probably around the 2 or even lower region. 1.5 or 2 for me.
Have a look. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well. Let's have a look at who we gave any 2s in 1.5. So Symmetra is 2. Sphara is 2. Mei is 2. Genji is 2. Doomfist. So is she more of a Doomfist, or is she more of a Genji, Mei, Pharah? I think she's probably not as useless as a Doomfist who's not doing anything.
Yeah. I think 2 is fair.
Yeah, I think 2 is fair. Because, you know, there is, like, again, there are some ways to get value. You know, you can just armor pack people, and that's at least something. And
Rally is better than Doom a lot of the times as well. Like, it's easier to just press Q, and there you go. Okay. So in terms of ceiling, this one is like, obviously she has been meta defining for, not meta defining, but a big hero in metas for a while now. I think there's 2 reasons why that is. One is because she does provide anti-dive resources. Even though she herself is pretty squishy, she definitely is a big contributor to keeping another squishy support alive, whether that's an Ana, a Bap, or a Zen. If you don't run a Brig, you're going to have a bad time up against Tracer. Like, Brig was the necessary evil for a long time, not even because of Bash, really. Like, Bash was a thing, but it was because of armor pack. Like, you could always, you know, you could look at a Tracer, you know, go swinging at her, and you being distracted looking at a Tracer didn't really impact your team that much, because Brig's contribution in team fight wasn't landing shots. If that makes any sense. In other words, like, if I'm playing Lucio or Zen or Bap and I'm healing my Zen, I'm not shooting the enemy Reinhardt. I'm not healing my Reinhardt. That's a big problem. Whereas with Brig, once you proc your Inspire, you know, you pack your DPS, your contribution to team fight is lower anyway. You don't want to be in their face swinging your thing anyway. You generally want to be kind of playing a little bit more of a distance, playing it safe. And so you're more than willing to, you know, bully a Tracer a little bit, swing at her, look at her ugly, you know, make faces, you know, and maybe hit a whip shot. And then it was her ability to kind of discourage dive a little bit with armor packs, bash, whip shot, and just not being punished for having her attention split as much as other supports. And then the other thing was the fact that, as we mentioned earlier, Brig has big impacts in DPS wars, especially when overpack was a thing. You know, that was even stronger than Harmony Orb, when you could pack a DPS like a 225 HP Tracer, I think it was, or 200 HP. Like, that was insane. You know, and people were doing this with Pharmacy, with Tracer, with Genji, whatever. The DPS is just super powered now. And so that's where Brig's value ceiling is really high. Now, her ability to mitigate dive as her HP has dropped, as her self-sustain has dropped, has also dropped. as is her ability to pocket her DPS, because you can't overpack anymore. But those are still big factors, and most importantly, those are still big factors at high level Overwatch. Tracer, Echo, Sniper Wars, where, you know, getting a pack can be a big deal. Ball play. Ball is a very strong hero right now and will continue to be. So I think right now, I think value ceiling is 3, but with a very important asterisk for me. And the reason for that is ironically, if Brawl does become meta, and by Brawl I mean anything that's faster tempo, short range, whether that's with a Monkey Zarya double bubble comp that we've seen some in pros, whether that's a Ryan, Kree, Diva, Lucio, whatever the traditional Brawl comp is, whatever that may be, Brig is awful in those comps. She can't contribute in either of those comps very well. Well, it depends on the comp, but especially like Brawl stuff, she doesn't do very well. So value ceiling is a 3, but if meta changes, she might plummet really hard. So that's my take.
Yeah, I don't have any sort of thing to disagree with you on there.
I kind of monologue there. I apologize.
Okay. No, I think that's fair. I think that's very fair. I think it's good because, you know, you understand these things more intimately than many other people in the community might, because obviously having been a coach, you see the impact of all these things, and so particularly the sort of nuances of picking versus not picking, because it can be a whole nother beast in ranked where
right,
the individual skill of a player will often skew your perception of how strong a hero is. But obviously at the highest level, these are players who will train to play the meta heroes, so it's actually the strength of the heroes that's equally important, unless you have like a player who's just like a god on one particular hero. But yeah, understanding what do we get as a team if we pick this hero versus what do we get as a team if we pick this hero is, yeah, I think very important. And so yeah, very happy to default to your
sounds
take
good.
there.
Buffs and nerfs. These next 2 categories are going to be really hard. I think all the other 4 we've been able to logic it through, but I think Brig is just in an awkward spot. And I'm glad you get this one first.
Well, so this is again in the pursuit of my content creator patch. I've been trying to figure out, you know, I'm trying to get as many opinions as I can, because I've not got the hubris to think that I know how to balance Overwatch. I'd like to default to the people who understand each of these heroes more intimately than I could ever do. So I sort of reached out to Violet a little bit to ask their opinion on Brig changes. At the moment, they said armor pack changes, and I haven't been able to get more than that out of them yet. I'm still waiting on a reply on what those armor pack changes could be. But I think that for now, if there was something to change, that's probably... I think some people want rally change, but I think that's, again, probably too central to her as a hero that they feel like they don't want to change that.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think armor pack as a panacea to just kind of throw out, you know, at long distances kind of feels... I think that's what gives Brig this whole perception as a hero who does too much of everything, right? I think if you were to change armor pack in a way, it would actually radically change how Brig is perceived, because then, you know, it depends on how it's changed, but it would infringe upon her ability to interact with stuff like a million miles away, which, as we spoke about, someone like even a Bap can't do. Like, he can't heal someone a million miles away because it's just so imprecise.
Right.
And ordinarily Brig wouldn't be able to, because it's like if they're not in the whip shot rally inspire range, but she can't do anything. But of course, armor pack changes that dynamic very strongly. So something about armor pack being changed, I think, would be the way to go.
Potentially, yeah. It definitely feels like she kind of fills that niche of anti-dive, plus also helps DPS pop off at the same time. It kind of, like right now, those are like kind of tenuous right now, like her armor, but it's unfortunate that like, I don't know. To me, this is just an asterisk hero without even saying anything. I don't think she really deserves another nerf. I know people gripe about her a lot, but she really isn't that oppressive. It's just that she's right now pretty good at dealing with the heroes that are meta right now. But as soon as things swap to like hard brawl, and honestly even spam, like I think with her, her overpack being nerfed, with her personal survivability being nerfed, if things go back to spam again, I think you're going to see Mercy. I don't think you're going to see Bat Brig or Brig Mercy or even Zen Brig anymore. At least not as much, especially if we see Ball nerfs. If you see the reason why Brig was even played in spam comps was because of Ball. Like if you see Ball go away, then there's no reason not to run Zenyatta Mercy 24/7. So I think she's a very tenuous hero that is going to be very, very hurt or benefit immensely from, depending on what other heroes have benefit from.
Yeah, this is one of those funny, again, the chess games of the meta where it's like Ball basically if there's a Ball versus Zenyatta, this is literally like a free 5v6 every fight, because that guy is the most useless against Ball. But again, then you mandate the necessary of a Brig to keep your Zen alive, because he's so strong to have in the game.
Right.
That keeping him alive is value in of itself.
Right, exactly. And here's another little fun fact for people in chat. The Zen is actually an excellent Ball counter if he's supported. You'll see Ball is like oppressive against support backups that don't have Discord, because he can just literally do whatever he wants and he just never dies. Like, you can CC him, but he just never dies. We can roll through, slam, roll through again, shoot, roll through. He just doesn't care. Like, obviously he might get a little less done, but the Brig Zen is so strong because it's like, yeah, Ball's strong, but if you mess up, if you get bashed or flashed, you're dead instantly. And Discord is a big, it's like Ball counters Zen, but Zen also counters Ball. It's like, it's kind of funny. Okay, fun against, again, I don't even know, man. Like, she's a lot more like, if you look at skill floor, value floor, skill ceiling, I don't see any major issues right off the bat. Maybe she's a little too weak at lower ranks, but part of that's community perception. Maybe she's a little too strong at higher ranks, but again, that's just based off of what the meta and the way that the meta is played at higher ranks right now. So nothing really egregious there. So then it just comes down to really personal preference. Now, Old Brig was literally almost single-handedly the reason why I quit playing main tank, because I quit, like, it was bash through shield. This is on release Brig. I remember I played Monkey and Diamond. I just couldn't play Monkey anymore, like, because of Brig. Like, there was just no more Monkey. You didn't do any damage to armor at all. And yeah, so like I hated Brig back then. But, over time, like, the heroes that are like, oh, Brig, he's suppressive. Like, Tracer can very easily kill Brig right now. Bash does 5 damage right now. It's not like you get one shot if you get bashed. And even Rally, which was literally just a ridiculously broken ultimate, has been nerfed a lot. And so it's a little bit less of a frustrating ultimate. It's still strong. So my initial gut says she's certainly not a fun hero to play against, but she's also not obnoxiously broken. I want to say like 2, maybe. But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just having a look. Let's compare. Because she's definitely not like, she's not one. I think she's not like the Sombra, right?
No.
Again, I think Old Brig would have been this, but
yeah, absolutely.
Since she's been changed, she's a lot less of a problem. I wouldn't even say she's as unfun as a Mei, right? Like, Mei or Doomfist are both 1.5, and I think those guys are a lot more annoying.
Agreed.
So I think 2 is fair.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think 2 is fair.
I think so too.
Because I think that, again, and I think that there's another thing to be said of like, again, this is obviously very subjective in of itself, but this changes very radically in the situation where you find her. Like, in a meta situation, you might argue that this should be lower just because of how she's interacted with the meta, both currently and even in the recent past. And also you might look at it as like oh, well, if I'm one-on-oneing a Brig, she'll probably beat me. But that's not necessarily the only metric, I think.
And I would even go so far as to disagree with that. Like, Brig is not even that good in 1v1s anymore because of the paper shield and the terrible Inspire self-healing now. So, like, I don't even think that argument carries through. So.
Oh, did we delete the slide? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I fat fingered it. I was hoping
delete
you would
Brig.
It actually happened. I actually deleted Brig, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome. So yeah, I know, like, there's a lot of people out there that desperately hate Brig and think she's like everything wrong with Overwatch, but I think on initial design, I think you could have made that argument, but I think she no longer fills that niche anymore, and now she's just kind of like a punching bag. And I honestly think she's a little bit of a distraction of major issues that are problematic, which I think is like, people will like punching bag Brig when there were other issues that especially now that there are other issues that need to be discussed. So I think like let's not put all of our eggs in one basket and blame Brig when there's other issues that need to be discussed. But yeah. Okay. Well, any last thoughts?
No, I'm just curious. I would be more curious than anything, just kind of probe you a little bit more on what you mean by other sort of issues to be discussed. Are we going to get to them, or are they wider picture issues?
It's just like bigger picture issues. Just like, I think, like, along the lines of like, in general, for example, a long time, a lot of people were complaining a lot about support, like sustain meta, why is Brig played, why is Brig always played, like Bat Brig, Orisa Sigma, Brig Zen, Ball Tracer. And for a long time, that was because just the amount of DPS creep that had come up, like you couldn't play Bap Zen anymore, because if you played Bap Zen, Tracer would murder you over and over and over again. And so people would blame Brig when the problem was that you couldn't not play Brig. You just couldn't. Because if you didn't play Brig, your backline would just instantly die to Tracer off of cooldown. And this was mostly due to the fall off buff that she received. They revert that, and now there's a little more flexibility with playing her on Tracer, right? And so like it's you don't have to play a Brig to keep your backline from instantly being one shot. And, the same thing goes with Ball. Can you imagine playing any support into Ball other than Brig? Like it'd be terrible. Like so many, like you get so much attention, your Zen dies immediately. We saw some teams at the very, very top level play Zen Mercy on maps where Zen Mercy was really, really good. But other than that, teams just had to play Brig, because if you didn't go Brig, your Zen or your Mercy or whatever just died off of cooldown, the Ball Tracer, over and over and over again. So like for a long time, Brig was kind of lampooned as like this broken hero when she was the only thing preventing backline from dying off of cooldown over and over again, which came from the DPS power nerfs from support power creep. So if you go way back to GOATs, all these DPS get buffed because tanks and supports are ridiculously busted. They lock 222, but now you have all these busted tanks and support or DPS. And so as they slowly nerf tanks and supports to their to more reasonable levels, well, now you have all of these DPS that have been buffed to high heaven to deal with overpowered tanks and supports. And so now, then we have that issue. But I think overall, like recently, we've started to see some of that dial back. Like we've seen Ashe nerfs, we've seen Echo nerfs. I mean, Genji obviously notoriously got nerfed. We've seen McCree nerf, fire rate, like his DPS output is lower. We've seen Mei nerfs. We've seen Reaper kind of up and down. We've seen Tracer nerfs. We've seen Widow nerfs. So we've seen nerfs across most of the DPS with a few exceptions. And I think that's kind of like what you want to be doing, because I'm all for like everybody nerfs until everybody does 1 damage, but you can go through the cast since release, and most of the heroes had received, especially the DPS cast, had received direct raw damage buffs since their release. And I think like Brig was kind of the one that was brought in to kind of deal with that, because she enabled those powerful DPS and also disabled them at the same time. And then she kind of got scapegoated as this cancer, awful hero to play, when in reality she was just a victim of the dev balance philosophy, and rather than just a fundamentally broken hero. But anyway, that was a little bit of a long tangent.
No, that's exactly what I wanted. So I'm glad to hear it. Again, I'm always interested to hear insight from people who are more in touch with this than I am, because I'm not someone, if cards on the table, who sort of has the interest in following the intricacies of the top tier meta. I'd rather have it broken down from people like yourself who understand it, and I respect your opinion. So
sure, I appreciate it.
I'd rather just default to, not necessarily just always default to someone else's opinion, but just listen to what other people are saying.
Sure.
That's exactly the kind of insight I was looking for. So thank you.
Sure, no worries. Okay, well, we're halfway done, and one of the awful heroes is done. Well, not quite halfway done, but we got Bap and Brig done. So
yeah, we got the sort of the two of the three, I would say, the most talked about out the way.
This one's gonna be interesting. So I feel like Lucio is like one of the heroes where nobody really, not many people hate Lucio, but he's an odd one, because he's been out of meta for a long time, even though he's not particularly weak. And I think I'm gonna test your brain, SVB. I'm gonna test your brain. This is gonna be a pop quiz. You didn't even know it was coming. So
all right,
why do you think Lucio has not been meta as of recently? Think about what I said about the supports that have been favored recently, and what they do and what Lucio cannot do. What is Lucio's limitation?
Is it that he can't help in the spam poke and also the DPS duels?
That's the big one right there. Yeah, right there. So like Lucio's impact is very limited. Now he does have speed, and one of the big things in brawl versus brawl, like a good Lucio versus a bad Lucio sits on heal song, speed song, and just sits there, right? And he'll spam Rhine Shield, right? Good Lucio is like up on the wall, booping away the enemy, the enemy Echo or the enemy Sombra or whatever, and like disabling that angle and speeding his Rhine in and booping their Rhine in and putting spam on in the back line, forcing her to like do what. So like, the Lucio is like actively all over the map. But he doesn't want to leave his teams with his aura, right? Most of the time. Because you end up you cost your heal and speed of your team. It's just you, and that's no good. So like you look at heroes like Mercy and Zen and Brig who don't really compromise their roles by supporting off angles. They can just play wherever they want. Lucio has to actively physically move himself onto his DPS or onto wherever's going on an angle to actually contribute. So like that's the problem with Lucio. If you see a Tracer versus Tracer duel, what are you going to do about that? Like, what can you help with? On. Yeah, exactly. Like, what are you going to do with it? Like, how can you contribute to that at all? Like, how are you going to contribute in Echo versus Echo? Or like, how do you contribute in a Widow duel? How do you enable your Widow through res or damage boost or Discord or anything? Like, there's nothing you do outside of what's immediately around you. And when we talk about my philosophy anyway with Overwatch and how I believe the entire game is dictated by map control, Lucio just unquestionably is more limited in that aspect compared to other heroes, and so that's why you only see him in Brawl and metas that everybody can kind of clump up to some extent. And you even said, like, if you look at like for example, there was a meta with going back last summer. Sorry, I'm getting off topic again, but like Orisa Sigma.
No, go ahead.
Bap Brig was like Orisa Sigma Bap Brig with like May or whatever, and it was more almost like a brawlier spam, and people were always like, man, why aren't you playing Lucio? And the simple answer is that whether it was Genji or Hanzo or Echo or Tracer, you would have one of your DPS split, and if you were not running a Brig or a Zen, you couldn't help that DPS at all. Like, your DPS would just be completely isolated. So yeah, Lucio aura with your Orisa Sigma, May, Bap all clumped up would have been really useful, but it would have been at the immense expense of your other DPS gets no help. And that's where Lucio has issues, really. He generally has to play around DPS that don't demand support as much, and that obviously limits him to heroes like Reaper and May and heroes that don't split, and even like a McCree who don't split as much. But yeah, anyway, that is my take of why Lucio hasn't been as meta. I guess for skill floor, is this me? Skill floor? Is this? I honestly can't remember.
I don't remember now. Go for it.
Okay, I'll go for it. I think skill floor with Lucio is pretty low. I think being able to exist and heal aura, amping when your team is low, putting some pressure, booping enemies away as necessary. I think I'm gonna set on this one, because the way I'm dictating skill floor could also be arguably, hey, that's not even how you play Lucio at a base level. You should be doing some sort of wall riding, some sort of booping. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. maybe because I think I think of the AFK set on cart, heals everybody, shoots the enemy shield, builds up a beat, gets a nice beat off, yada yada, that's fine, and doesn't die off of cooldown. But at the same time, like that is just isn't, you're not doing a whole lot there. Are you really even at the skill floor there? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, this is exactly the question, right? This is the question of like, do you need that whole mechanic? It's kind of like I would equate it maybe to the Ana quick scoping. It's like, I probably wouldn't tell if there was a Plat Ana playing, I probably wouldn't, and I'm seeing like her not get value. I probably wouldn't be like, you need to start quick scoping to up your value. Yeah. There's probably a lot of things I'd put in first. Although with Lucio, probably wall riding and trying to be a bit of a playmaker and displace key targets and stuff is more central to his value, basically.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think some element of like, I would say probably some level of understanding, but it's just tough to make that call of whether that classifies in skill floor or not. Yeah.
So that's where we just have to end up using our judgment. Because I think if you do include some measure of wall riding or map control as part of Lucio's kit, then you unquestionably have to move him up to at least a 2.5, maybe a 3 in terms of floor. But if you don't include wall riding, then I think you're at 1.5 or even like 1.5 or 2. And I think seeing as how the game has evolved and how necessary it is to do those things to get, like, if you're not doing those things, why are you playing Lucio kind of thing? True. You can exist to do more as Bap or as Mercy or as even Moira nowadays.
Exactly, I think. So, yeah, I think 2.5 to 3 is fair. I think 2.5 to 3 is fair.
Okay.
I think 2.5 is what I lean towards. Sure. If we gave Ana 2.5, I think you could also just heal bot Lucio and get some value, even if you weren't wall riding Lounge. So I think that's probably fair. Now, yeah, the ceiling gets interesting because you see some crazy Lucio shit. Like,
Yeah.
there's some crazy Lucio players out there.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so there really is like a crap ton you can do. And I remember as well, like when goats was the thing, there was like a lot of actually discussion about who was like good Lucio players and all. And a lot of the time, the difference came from like how much damage the Lucio players were contributing to, on top of like doing all their
Right.
general
Exactly.
Lucio duties. Was like, actually, how much is this guy contributing to the rest of the fight,
Right.
and sort of the offensive output.
Right, right. I mean, it's that plus the wall riding. The mechanics are not irrelevant. They're certainly relevant. Um, I think he doesn't have. Well, I mean, boop, amp, heal versus speed. Those are all cooldowns that take thought and decision making. Positioning with him is not easy. His ultimate usage isn't always easy either. He can be a very punishing, like notoriously. Oh no, I beat it there, but somebody's already dead. Like that happens more with Lucio's beat than it does with a lot of other support ults because it's not instacast. I think unquestionably, I think it has to be, like, whether he's a good hero or not, or now, I think it has to be a 3.5. I would not put him below Ana in terms of ceiling, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think maybe his impact is a little less tangible than in Ana, but it makes it nonetheless important. And certainly theoretically, the ceiling is ridiculously high. Like you can always, even in a pro Lucio, you could always play that, hit your shots a little more or a little better, or can position yourself a little more. So I think 3.5 easily.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think obviously the arguments can be made in many ways, but of course, think about the fact that Lucio's responsibility in a team is also usually to be the primary shot caller.
Right.
So that is another skill that you could potentially add to the skill ceiling aspect. Obviously depends whether we're talking pure skill, pure solo play or team play.
But it is a factor.
Yeah, and I think that where he may not have necessarily like as flashy the mechanics as an Ana, the game, like, I think you have to understand the game on a macro level as well. Probably the best out of maybe any of the supports as Lucio.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you are so central to dictating the beginnings and ends of fights.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I did the VOD review Reddit post thing on Lucio enable versus disable, and it was. I mean, I done one with Brig, I done one with Mercy, I done one with Zen, and it was the most difficult up to that time, I guess, thinking process for me to figure out what Lucio did to contribute to map control. It took a lot of effort, and ultimately, in the middle of a team fight, Lucios have to use a lot of split-second judgment to make the right call about what they need to be doing at that any point in time. It was a lot easier to make that decision with Zen, Mercy, and Brig than it was with Lucio. And part of that is because he's more limited with his range. He has to be very quick at responding and moving. And then obviously, if he messes up, it's not like, oh, it's fine, I'll just swap Harmony Orb. It's like, you're in the wrong part of the map. So I think he's a very difficult hero to play. Like, his limitations force you to put a lot more hustle into what you're doing.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
So this one is you, right? Value floor.
Yeah, value floor. Well, I don't know. To me, I just don't think he's a particularly useful hero. I think you have to include, like, we're saying, like, okay, what was it, like 70% of maps? That was going to be like our guideline or something like that he's played on. Because there's obviously maps where Lucio is going to do more than others. Like Koth having the initial speed out of spawn is really helpful to get map control early. Also, in a lot of Koth, boops are a lot more relevant. But that's only a couple maps, so that's really going to be, it's really easy just to to threaten people with boops here. So like, there's a lot of maps, but there's also a lot of maps where Lucio is just absolute trash. Your Junker towns. And also another thing with Lucio is he's also can be very, very bad against certain comps and very good against certain comps. So he's a lot more like flimsy when it comes to, like, it's not like a hero like a Brig or a Mercy or Zen who's a little more flexible. Like, you can technically play Zen with Brawl. It's not great, but you can do it. Lucio is like, hey, I'm actually, this is like, there are unironically some compositions that I coach players that you need to be Reddit Lucioing, because there's nobody in your aura. Like, you have to you almost play like a budget tracer essentially, because there's nothing else that you can contribute. So I think, like, value floor is, there's a lot of, in terms of value floor, there's a lot of times where you can really do nothing or very little as Lucio, even if you are getting some of the wall riding that we described as skill floor. So I'd say probably a 2 for me.
Yeah, this is tricky because obviously he's a hero who's very much left behind. Like, nothing necessarily has changed that drastically about Lucio. It's just that now other people do more. So I think when we look at that context, it's very low. Like you can't, if we're thinking hero internal to the hero, you could probably get a lot of value just like sitting there, right, with your songs on, in terms of like you're getting heals out and speeds out. But in actual, I think big picture value, it's much different. Like it's a much different case. Like big picture value is like really doo-doo if because you could have just picked
Yeah.
a much more impactful hero.
Yep. Yep.
So that for me is what the question is like, is this value intrinsic to the hero, or is this, and I guess we have favored meta side, haven't we, when we talked about
We have
value.
value is unfortunately key to the floor, a little less so, but certainly ceiling. Yeah, I don't know. I would say value floor. It's certainly not high.
I think two's fair, because like if Brig can get a 2 in the metal ranks, let's say, then I think Lucio could get about the same, because of, yeah, I think it's about the same.
He might feed
it's
a little
quite tricky to
less.
figure out.
Right, he might feed a little less, but his ult's a little worse, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's more easy to enable your team with Lucio in the sort of your average game, I think, than
True.
than with Brig. You can
That's
you can still get impact.
All right, for ceiling thoughts. Again, very meta
Well,
dependent.
this has been very meta dependent, and obviously he's been, again, we just said he's been left behind a lot. I think he just, like, if we look at a lot of aspects of his kit, I think they're well designed, right? They're like,
Sure.
I always think back to, he's kind of like the way Reinhardt works is you either swing or you shield. There's no both. You don't get to swing and shield.
Right.
Whereas like a lot of the more recent heroes, well, Sigma is a perfect example of you shoot and shield, and Lucio's the same problem where it's like you heal or you speed. You don't do, and you or you go and help one particular person on your team and help them survive.
Right.
Whereas like a Brig is like, no, I will heal, and I will control space, and I will enable my DPS. Or like a Bap is like, I can pretty much shoot and heal, and I have like utility elsewhere as well. So it's pretty doo-doo, I think, as well. His value ceiling is like is not that great.
So this is where I think you put another asterisk with Brig, because he is a hero that I think probably around the 2 region in terms of value ceiling, but is again very meta dependent. So let me think about this. Because Brawl, well, let's put it this way. Brawl as a composition, if you buffed the crap out of Rein and made like Rein so strong, if you took away Lucio's speed or nerfed Lucio's speed, you would still not see Rein be meta, because Rein will never be able to clear out space fast enough.
Yeah, he's slave to Lucio, as Lucio is to him, I suppose.
Well, he's slave to Lucio, especially against non-Brawl comps. In other words, like in a Brawl versus Brawl, you could realistically say Lucio is not, like, it's still very good and very important, but not as important. But it's like Lucio is there to prevent them from not going Rein, right? Because if they go like dive or spam or something like that, then you're screwed. You're just dead. You're sitting ducks. So he's kind of in this weird niche of where he's like completely worthless in any, like, you never, like, I think, what was it, the avoided composition we saw in EU contenders? That was the only composition we've ever seen Lucio in a non-Brawl comp. The only time. Whereas heroes like Brig, Mercy, even Moira, heck, we've seen in comps that were outside of their archetypes. Lucio has never, ever been outside of that archetype. But at the same time, if you're playing Brawl, you're playing Lucio. Like, I think I've seen, for a very brief period of time, and North American contenders, on a couple teams played on a Brig with their Rein for a brief period of time. But even that didn't stick. That was gone pretty quickly. So he's like, you play Brawl, you have to play Lucio. You just have to. He speeds his whole core around. He helps everybody. He can move you around to avoid spam, which is really important. He can peel your backline if they're playing dive. He's like a jack of all trades. And obviously he benefits the more people that are around him, but he's just absolutely awful. So I think value ceiling for Lucio is certainly a 2, but with the asterisks of the fact that if the meta becomes Brawl, he's instantly 3. Instantly. Right? If not higher.
Yeah.
Because his impact just suddenly rockets up.
Yeah, and again, I like the mention of the sort of how even in Brawl, it's like you're picking him so that the enemy team is disincentivized from picking a non-mirror. Like they also should go Rein. Otherwise, your Lucio is going to speed in. Because I get this question sometimes where people, in Plat, they're going to play Rein v Rein, Rein Zarya, King's Row kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And in that scenario, sometimes people are like, we don't have a Lucio, we're going to lose. But actually, in that mirror match, you could actually get equal, if not more value sometimes with a different pick. Because
Even
they're
in the
going to speed on
brawl.
you at the same time anyways.
Exactly. Because it's like
they're going to reach you at the same time.
Right. And especially in the lower ranks, the things that Lucio contributes in brawl are very unintuitive, like booping right in, shooting creep, like amping your speed out to avoid nano Ryan. Like I highly doubt that a mid-tier Lucio is going to be able to nail those. So you might as well just play another hero. It's going to be easier to play there.
Exactly.
For sure. Okay, buffs, nerfs. I think this actually really ties in really well with the value ceiling and what we just talked about. I don't know. I think like he is a hero that I think is just needs to be left as he is. I would be curious to see, because like, you know, obviously we like, I can't tell if he's fundamentally very well designed or very poorly designed, because he's very well designed in the fact that he fills his niche very well. He can't have his cake and eat it too. But you can also say it's poorly designed because he's extremely typecasted, I guess would be the word. Like he can't flex outside of his design role at all. So in terms of buffs or nerfs, if the game moves away from brawl a little bit, well then, and even if then you're never ever going to see Lucio. So if we're talking about all heroes have some sort of hybrid capabilities, Lucio just doesn't at all. So I think maybe, you know, maybe we leave Lucio as he is and he make other heroes more like him, or we vice versa. But I think for right now, certainly the hero itself is not like broken in any aspect, and I honestly would be scared to touch him right now. Certainly.
I think one thing that we should probably bring into this equation is the weakness of beat. I think compared to, like, I think beat is another example of something that's been left behind. Like,
for sure.
It used to be a thing that like in the game you mandated having either beat or transcendence. It was like there was no other way to play the game. Like you had to have one defensive support ultimate. But now obviously the value that supports provide in other ways actually just outstrips beat completely, to the point where beat is like, even to fulfill what beat is supposed to fulfill, it becomes tough, because quite often Lucios are at like 90-something% when the key ultimates from other heroes start coming in, and he's just like a little bit too late, right, to actually have impact with the beat. So again, to go back to that content creator patch that I'm designing, this is something I've tried to do to try and help Lucio, but at the same time not buff unilaterally, because one thing I'm personally against are unilateral buffs that like kind of help your plat Lucio as much as they help the GM Lucio, right? Because I feel like that's always that's how games end up getting, like, heroes end up getting broken, is when you're like, well, the plat Lucio is struggling, well, let's give him something to help. Like the Reinhardt damage buff, I think, speaks to me this way, where it's like, who's this really meant for? Like, it doesn't change Reinhardt in any way. He just makes him more scary where he's already scary.
Exactly, that buff made no sense whatsoever.
So the way I've designed it, I've tried to give him a new metric. I've just called it the music meter for the time being. And basically the music meter charges up as he wall rides. And it's like a maximum of charge time of like 5 seconds, for example. So if you're wall riding for 5 seconds consecutively, then its music meter is at its maximum. You know, if it's like 1 to 2 seconds, it's at its minimum. And that gives a sort of percentage buff to his amp and his beat. So it's like if he's been, let's say if his music meter has been charged for 5 seconds and then he beats, he gets like, let's say 10% more shield generation or something like that, right? That's the direction I'm thinking. Give me your thoughts.
I think that's definitely interesting. It might be a little bit too much, like not in terms of like overpowered, just like that would be like sometimes like you don't want to like over bloat a hero's kit, so there's like a million things to think about. But I think it'd be interesting to see. I think one thing that might be not so much as a buff, so much as a quality of life thing to help kind of give beat more of a signature is I would probably start by increasing the range of beat, or maybe even increasing the grace period. Because like you look at something like trance, and the reason trance is strong is because it's consistent healing over an extended period of time. Beat is more of a short-term thing. But I think one thing that we could also accentuate potentially with beat is the range by which that support actually functions. Because if you think it's something like a rally, you think of something like a Valk, coalescence, transcendence, they're all like centered around a location, even immortality field. Maybe give beat and make it less of a, hey, we're going to survive a big burst of damage, and more of like, it doesn't matter where on the map you are, like within obviously reasonable limitations, but you're going to get a boost in your contribution. But I'm unsure.
So like without LOS or still within LOS?
Well, that's what I'm not sure on. Like I think with LOS, I don't think you can say without LOS. But but I think maybe increase the grace period, certainly increase the range a little bit. Maybe make it that I don't know. I don't know. I'm just spitballing it. This is not my strength at all, but I look at that and I'm trying to find like you said, I want to like find a way to accentuate his strengths without like just raw buffing him. You know what I'm saying? But I'm unsure. So I'm not sure. Like I think like again another asterisk like it is with the most of the heroes. Saying raw buffs or nerfs is unfair because if you buff him, then like he doesn't need the buff. It's not going to make him be played and dive or or spam. It's going to make him more oppressive in brawl.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing of it. My changes are kind of more designed to sort of incentivize doing the things in Lucio that I feel people don't do. So wall riding and trying to have an impact that way. But
yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
I do like that though because it does encourage like lower rank players to kind of try out the kit. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I mean, like with an Ana, like you have like these abilities sitting there, like you got to figure out how to use them. Like whereas with Lucio, it's like sometimes you don't really feel bullied into trying to figure out how to use them. The Ana player is like, man, I'm missing my sleep again. I got to work on that. With a Lucio, it's like maybe you just see a gold Lucio just sitting on the floor, and he's like, okay, well, what do I do now? Like the value of wall ride isn't something that they necessarily intuitively find. So maybe if you found an external way to motivate it, they might accidentally figure out that hey, wall ride's pretty good.
Yeah, that's kind of exactly. That was exactly the thinking behind it, right? There's no visual incentive to do it at the moment.
Right.
So
right.
But yeah, I also think it doesn't necessarily. It doesn't move the needle in any way. It's just I think it's more of like it's one of those I feel like necessary power creeps almost, where it's like now the other supports exist.
Yeah.
Unless you completely dumpster those other supports who do more than Lucio, you do need to then power creep Lucio.
Yeah.
So he's not like just a dumpster pick.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes sense. I kind of like how it encourages players to try out different parts of the kit. I think that's interesting. So
okay, well, I guess so. Yeah, let's just give it an asterisk.
Give it an asterisk.
I think a 0.5 would be fair.
Sure.
I think considering how you left behind certain parts of him.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think some sort of 0.5 with an asterisk, I think would be fair. Like he does need looking at. He's probably the weakest support actually. Looking down, maybe Moira's there too, but I think Moira is fine. Like there's a different.
Yeah,
there's a whole different set of arguments with Moira. But I think in terms of like the heroes that you look at and you say these guys should have a place in the meta, I think Lucio is like the weakest of those.
For sure. No, absolutely. And Lucio doesn't. Well, we'll get to that when we get to Moira, but he's the weakest challenging hero to play.
Yeah,
let's put it that way.
Yeah, considering all the skill ceiling and stuff we've said, the fact that he gets such little value is obviously clearly, even from our own metrics, this is clearly problematic, right? Like, to have a skill floor of 2.5 and a skill ceiling 3.5 and only get 2 value either way is like something wrong there.
Right. Okay, fun against. Your thoughts?
I mean he's fun. There's innately his kit is funny because it's so centered around like environmentals and like crazy Reddit Lucio plays. So there's like I suppose it's like fun against versus fun to see.
Yeah.
Where it's like, Lucio is just like a fun character in that way.
Yeah.
Now, is it fun to be against him? I mean, I don't think anyone's mad when they get like environmental kill. They're just like, well, because it's like you done fucked up. You were near an edge and in he came.
Yeah. I would say he's probably a 2.5 for me. Like he is annoying in a lot of circumstances, but like you have to kind of respect it a lot more than you would with other heroes. And also he like the thing with Lucio as well is it's like if besides Boop, there's nothing a lot about his kit that's super annoying. Like he doesn't have high spam. The amp heals amp speed. Speed is not like a particularly annoying mechanic to play against. Beat is not a particularly annoying mechanic to play against. And he does take more skill than a lot of the other quote unquote unfun heroes. So I think for me, I think it's pretty clear 2.5. And I think another thing as well, this might sound very minor, but I actually think the fact that like Reinhardt received his steadfast buffed also makes it a little less frustrating to play against. Because I know as a Rein player, like Boops in general were just miserable because you would go flying, like, wait, I'm supposed to be like 950 million trillion pounds, like what's going on? So like his boot feels a little bit more well balanced in comparison to at least as a Rein player. So I don't know. This might sound minor, but I think 2.5.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I would have gone 2.5 or 3, so I think I can agree with 2.5. I think obviously there's always a little bit of a bias when a hero isn't meta because you don't see them that often, so you don't necessarily get as annoyed at them.
Right.
Whereas the more you see a hero, the more likely you are to just be like pissed off by the sight of them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Okay.
Anything
So
else?
now the big
Oh dear.
big boss.
Oh dear.
This is me, I think, right? Skill floor.
Yeah.
Um, this has to be as low as it gets. This is just by design. Uh, she's meant to be the entry level hero. So I think I think I'm one of the bigger advocates of Mercy out there in that I respect her position in the game. I sort of I try not to default to like what a lot of people are like, Mercy dumb hero, blah blah blah, because I think there's a lot of depth to the hero. I think external to the character as well. I think there's a lot of interesting. And you, I think, popped in the other day when I was doing this sort of social breakdown of Mercy's place in the game
Yes.
as a character, right? As like as a person and as a main that people pick. But I think despite that, she is by I think maybe alongside Moira the most accessible hero there is by design. So I think if she's not a one, then I don't know who is.
I mean, certainly not. I think. Let me look at what I got here. I would have to disagree slightly. I think she's higher than a one. Because I look so I'm looking at heroes that are more fundamentally like intuitive, and there just isn't a lot to them. Like Bastion, I think was the one we graded on a 1. We graded Junkrat on a 1.5. Like, would we say that Mercy's a little easier than Junkrat in terms of like understanding what the hero's role is? Reaper as well. Torbjorn was also 1.5 in terms of skill floor, in terms of like being very intuitive. And would you say that Mercy's skill floor is on par with Moira? Because I think I would say her skill floor would be a little higher.
Again, I guess this depends on the discrepancy of how we define skill floor.
Right. So for me, I would define skill floor as not feeding your brains out with your positioning and actually positioning yourself properly, and not going for bot reses, which people below skill floor do all the time and get punished for. Maybe damage boosting occasionally, that would be nice, and I also think Valk is actually a less valuable ultimate in terms of just pressing Q when you get value out of it than Coalescence. So obviously value is not exactly part of the skill floor.
Well,
but I think it's something that we have to consider.
The value is different, right? I think as well I'm with you in theory. I'm just trying to figure out where it lands her, because the thing is, in terms of actually accessing those elements of the kit, there's nothing to it, right? There's nothing. So there's no execution element to it.
So here's my thought process.
It depends. Go ahead.
Here's my thought process. So you the way you're defining floor with Mercy is like you're just kind of heal beaming and you're just like not dying. By that very same metric of just surviving and healing, Moira does more and has an easier time surviving. Plus has an ultimate.
No. I definitely think that Moira also, like, Moira is bottom of skill floor. I don't have any complaints about that.
My problem is like, I think that she is noticeably hard to survive with. I think like you get noticeably less done by just pressing mouse 1 compared to a Moira. And I think just by having a skill floor base level of understanding, Coalescence is easier of an ultimate to, like, okay, forget value. Coalescence is easier to understand how to use and when to use. There is no real nuance very little nuance about Coalescence, whereas Valk, in terms of like your movement, resing, etc., there's just a lot more to think about. I think the only thing that Moira can theoretically have a little bit in terms of difficulty is like maybe her uses of Orb, but even that I think is comparable to Res and doesn't really put her above Mercy in terms of skill floor. So I think when I see Mercy, I think that she's just on par or harder than Moira in every single category. And I think that's enough to put her on 1.5. Because even if I compare her to compare like Mercy to a Bastion, I would also say Mercy's probably a little harder to understand than Bastion. So like the two, what I would say are one heroes, I'd say Mercy is higher than both of those.
Yeah, I think here I'm maybe a little bit biased because of how many Mercies I've seen at like Plat who are essentially doing what I'm describing, which is just like existing, occasionally using, switching between the beams.
Yeah.
And then they press Q and then they pull the Glock out and off they go. And they do res like bots.
Yes.
I think that I definitely, I mean, I definitely think that she's a very difficult to actually master hero, because there's
Yeah.
like many, despite the non-mechanical element to it, there's a lot of like nuances that are underappreciated, I think.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what keeps pulling me back, I think we can settle on 1.5, but what keeps pulling me back is that there is no precision required with anything you do as Mercy. Like, of course, there's a higher game sense
Yeah.
threshold than Moira, but like even right click, although generous, does require you to track to
Yeah.
some degree.
Yeah.
The Mercy beam will latch on to nearest target. The Valkyrie will latch on at a very generous rate and then
Right.
spiral out from there.
Right. Right.
Whereas, like, orb does need to be thrown, coalescence does need to be aimed, and does need to track some level of the dark, even if it's generous. And I'm not counting super jump into this, because I don't think super jump
No.
is
No, I don't think that's
part of the
floor.
skill floor.
No.
I don't think that's part of the skill floor. Skill
No.
ceiling, absolutely. Skill floor, no.
Yeah.
But I think if you want to go 1.5, I'll go 1.5 with you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Mercy mains, you better not say I never did anything for you, because I bought you a 0.5.
There you go.
Okay. In terms of ceiling, what are your thoughts? Because this is yours. Well, what
So
is it yours?
I'm a big
it's yours.
advocate. I think the skill ceiling is high. I think there's a lot of, again, I think where there may be a mechanical lack, there is a real, I think even now Mercy mains, despite how much they've played her, despite how picked she is, I still think there's actually more to uncover
Agreed.
with Mercy. There's like a lot more for people to actually figure out that they haven't necessarily done, particularly with, like, I think I just find constantly that people, whenever I'm on like Overwatch Twitter or whatever, I still see people doing new things with super jump all the time, and like or just Guardian Angel, right? Not even just super jump.
Mm-hmm.
There's like so many weird elements to Guardian Angel. Backwards jump, backwards and up. People like the slingshots can be very flexible. So I think there's a lot of like depth there that people are still figuring out. But obviously there's no mechanical input in sort of aim. There is a mechanical input in that the physical keyboard buttons you're pressing need to be in a certain order in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And of course there's a lot of like decision making, because like who you damage boost, when you damage boost them,
Yep.
is constantly shifting. So that's how I see. I think that people don't give enough credit to actually what it takes to make Mercy operate at the highest level.
Agreed.
Now where she lands is the question.
Yeah. So for me, ceiling, I look at Mercy and I'm like, all right. So she's strong. Like here's the problem with Mercy. Not the problem with Mercy, but one of the things that makes Mercy a little trickier to climb with is because a lot of the problem, when we brought this up with Brig, sometimes when you're doing the right thing, it doesn't exactly feel that very rewarding. When you make a big res, like you are on the right target, pocketing them at the right time, it doesn't feel, or like when you have a hero that's just like, hey, I survived, congrats, pat myself in the back. That's not exactly like, hey, all right, I killed the enemy team because I was able to support somebody by surviving, and my supporting them led to the team fight win. It's not exactly like super rewarding, but I do agree that like she is a hero that does have a lot higher of a ceiling than I think some people would describe her as. I think movement and the mechanical aspect of her is respectable. I think the big thing with Mercy is like your decision making. This is something I've gone over very, very, very heavily in my recent Mercy VOD reviews, because it's actually less important who you damage boost and more important about when you actually damage boost them. Because I'll see a lot of Mercies like, oh, they saw that one video where they should damage boost their Junkrat, but their Junkrat's like in spawn and their Winston's jumping in the middle of the enemy team. I'm like, if you can do it safely, damage boost your Winston, like you should be damage boosting people who are actively like engaging and who are actively taking aggressive positions. And that constantly changes, right? And that's constantly changing mid-team fight. And so that requires a lot of awareness. And then again, at the highest levels, we're talking about a hero who's literally should be 24/7 checking flanks, because you don't have to be aiming your gun, so you need to be looking left, looking right, looking left, looking right, looking left, looking right constantly. That's not even something that's debatable, that you have to do that if we're going to be hitting your ceiling. And then obviously you talk about like the decision making behind Resurrect, like damage boost versus heal, and even Valk itself is something that is not it's not a hard support ult to use, but it's harder than Cole, and in a lot of ways it's even harder than like Rally. Like it takes a little bit of decision making. There are times when pistoling is really good, like really good.
Yeah, is the play. Yeah,
it is absolutely the play. But then there's other times when you shouldn't be doing it at all. So there's a lot of decision making things with Mercy, and there are a little bit of mechanical things. So to me, I compare her directly with Brig in terms of her ceiling. I think she hits 2.5 right on the nose for me, because it's the same kind of mindset of decision making, positioning, who do you need to be helping, and some level of mechanical play, and also being a hero that can be punished very easily if you make a mistake, because Mercy is a hero that can be on literally different parts of the map at any given second, right? And that much like travel, that means that if you make a mistake, you're dead, right? When you're moving from so many points from across the map, at any point in time, somebody could get a good, a beat on you, or you might run into a tracer without Guardian Angel, and then you just die. So I think 2.5 for me is very firmly where she's at. Her lack of mechanics is a big factor for why she's not higher for me. And I think that like there's not a lot of parts of her kit that are super hard to understand. They're simple, but they take time to like actually master, if that makes any sense.
They're difficult to master. Yeah, they're ease of access, difficult to master, I think, is pretty much Mercy to the T, I would say. It's like anyone can see and this is why I was kind of arguing for lower floors, that anyone can see how to do this thing. Like you press right click, or whatever the equivalent is on console. But yeah, knowing when and knowing how is the real key. And that is, there's never a fixed answer. I think the way we rated Sombra earlier, when we were saying like there's never a right answer who to hack, because that's always shifting. It's the same with like Mercy, where it's like it's always shifting.
Right.
And this is where I think this next one is going to be a little bit tricky, because how much value you get, I think, is intrinsically tied to who's on your team. Because there's like, and I think particularly when I think of this particularly in terms of ranked play and the medal ranks, you can see Mercies do like the right sorts of things only for their teammates to do the wrong sorts of things and make it all invalid.
Yeah.
So how much value you get is difficult.
See, this is where I actually disagree a little bit. This is where I think kind of where we went into Brig's skill floor, like maybe could have been a little higher, but it's because people are just kind of bots. I think Mercy players as well have been very lazy with their thinking, and I think it's led to the hero kind of getting this mentality of where like you don't want to play Mercy to climb, you want to play other easier to hero climb with, right? Or easier heroes to climb with. And I think it's certainly, you feel less impactful, which I think is a big problem with Mercy. Like when you're doing the right things, you don't always get like that positive affirmation, right? Like if I position well as Zen, I don't die and I can hit shots, and that feels good. If I'm positioning well as Bap, I landed, or as Ana, I landed a big cooldown. With Mercy, it's like you don't always feel like when you are doing the right things, you don't always get that positive reinforcement for it. So maybe you don't actually see it as the right thing to do. But at the same time, I think part of it can still be, hey, Mercies need to understand, yes, sometimes your team doesn't always do the right thing, or maybe, the DPS that you're pocketing isn't popping off the Widow that you're pocketing. But in that instance here, should you be pocketing your Widow? And I've reviewed a lot of Mercy play from, I think, the silver to diamond area, and the amount of, in terms of they're in the wrong place, not only like feeding, but like also, why are you pocketing this person? Your impact is so much lower than it should be. And I think that kind of like gives the stigma of like, oh, the Mercy player, like we were talking about like the whole sexism thing you talk about. Oh, Mercy just blue beams her boyfriend and that's just how you climb. Well, I mean, that's how lazy Mercies climb. That's like that sexist stigma that sticks around. But like Mercies that are actually paying attention to what's going on in the battlefield and like, hey, I can help this, or I can help that, and I'm gonna res this and I'm gonna do that. Like I reviewed a Mercy just recently. I think it was low diamond or plat and on Gibraltar. And the very first fight, this Mercy I called out for being just completely lazy, very blue beaming this, looking for a res. The res wasn't there, but just tunneling on the res. Like, should I get the res? Should I get the res? And meanwhile, their teammates are like fighting, and then she's not helping them. And then I flame him for that. The very next fight, this Mercy is legitimately like, we're talking about APM with Ana. holy smokes. She damage boosts her Winston on initial jump. Bubble breaks, instantly healing. Winston disengages. She stops healing her monkey so that Ana can get the healing, and then immediately flies over to a Widow or a McCree on an aggressive angle. The McCree rolls behind cover, so she swaps to her Zenyatta damage boost, who then lands a big wreck. And it was like literally for like 45 seconds, the movement, the damage boost, the healing, the positioning, it was like art for like 45 seconds. It was like out of nowhere, this Mercy just kicked it up to another notch, and it was like, it was a great example, I think, for everybody in the chat at the time to like see how much impact this hero can have if you, even if you're not amazing at it, but just like if you're really hustling and you're really paying attention. And I think that's a key word that a lot of Mercies miss out on. And I think it's a cultural problem within the Mercy main community of where there's not a lot of hustle. When they've been told over and over and over again that your impact is low, that you just shut up and pocket me. And so that's like, even if they don't really believe it, that's like kind of like this mentality they get into. And so they don't put the same amount of effort that they should be putting into. Like how many Mercy mains are going to finish a game and be like, well, I guess my DPS are bad. And you know, is that versus like a Zenyatta or an Ana player? Are they going to feel like, man, I missed too many sleeps, I missed too many nades? With Mercy, you might not even like, are you going to be in the same mindset? You know what I'm saying? I'm not sure if I'm communicating that well.
No, it makes sense.
But it's a tricky subject for me. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, it makes sense. Again, I guess it's just like, it just comes down to that issue of not getting the feedback, the sort of,
yeah.
Again, I think another thing that Mercy players fixate on is stats, like how much is good damage boosted per 10 minutes or whatever. And I just never like stats at all, because again, they're just so,
even worse,
they're just so meaningless. Yeah, because it's like,
healing.
how much is good healing per 10 minutes? How much is good blue beam per 10 minutes? It's like, well, just no, it depends on who you blue beamed, who you healed, and when. And yeah, I think that's why it just becomes very difficult to know for yourself, I guess.
Yes.
As a Mercy player, like, did I do the right things or not?
Right. No, I think that's 100% like for example, you mentioned this earlier, is like, and I know this isn't exactly value flow, but like how many Mercies, even in like Plat, just bought out and res stuff that nobody should ever res. And it's like, why are you doing that?
Res has to be the most common res I've seen.
Seriously.
Like the sort of 4 people are dead. Oh, I can res now. And now both of you are feeding all
right,
charge.
Exactly. Now, and anybody knows that shouldn't do that. So I think, to be honest, so here's the thing though, it's like Mercy mains have this awful unfair stigma that they're all brain dead, you know, morons, and oh, you know, haha, you're a girl, you're bad at the video game, which is awful. But at the same time, we as a community, I think, almost babysit them and say, oh, you know what, you're just playing a low impact hero, you know, there's nothing you can do. And so these Mercies are like, okay, so there's nothing I can do. And then maybe there's like I don't know, I would love to see a GM bronze to Mercy challenge. Like, how come we don't see those?
I think ML did a unranked GM with Mercy, I believe.
Really?
It took him a while, but I think he did one.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. We don't see many, but I think that's probably partly why, right? Because of and maybe I'm guilty of this too, because I feel this way. I feel like it's very, very difficult to climb. I feel it's just a very painful process, and why wouldn't you pick Zen or Ana? Right. That's my perspective. It's like, why wouldn't you just pick them and do it easier?
Right. And my argument is then if you're playing Zen or Ana, if you're a Mercy player, Zen or Ana is probably pretty trash. So like, I don't know. Like, I just always encourage players to play like what they enjoy. And so like, my mindset is, if you're a player that enjoys playing Mercy and you're stuck in bronze, you're probably doing something desperately wrong that needs to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, or silver and gold and plat and diamond as well. Like, I've yet to come across a Mercy VOD of any even lower rank where I was like comfortable saying, you know what, unlucky, you pocketed them at the right time, they just didn't pop off, you know, GG, go next. So there's always something like your impact was a lot lower than it should be. And I think like, part of me is like, I sympathize greatly with the Mercy community because they're often victimized unfairly. But at the same time, I'm like, all right, so let's fix this. Like, let's fix this stigma around you guys. And I'm going to like educate you guys on like what you can actually be doing better, because I see so many players in the Mercy community, they get victimized, and then they get stuck in this rut of where, you know, I'm trying to think about a way to phrase this, like, of like, I'm limited by my teammates, and so there's nothing I can do. And I just think that's absolutely false. And I think like what you said earlier too, I think is really important, is that you don't get that positive reinforcement as well as you do with other heroes. So sometimes it's hard to know whether you're doing the right thing, and especially when you combine that with stats being pretty bad with Mercy and just across Overwatch. So it's like, well, by what metric, how do I improve? How do I get that positive reinforcement? And I think that's the problem with Mercy. Like, you can be doing a million great things, and outside of like the little tiny text of assist, like, how about we like when you get a big assist, how about like, you know, you get like 25 million% ult charge, and you know, like Jeff Kaplan personally drives to your house and pats you on the back. Like, where's the positive reinforcement here? Because I think that's it's like a two-edged sword. It's like the community is awful to Mercy mains, but a lot of Mercy mains don't do themselves any favors in terms of like how they approach the game. I think it's very lazy sometimes when you compare it to other heroes.
Yeah, honestly, I could and will happily go on about this for ages, because I think it's so fascinating. Because I think the other thing you have to add to Mercy as well is with her being the most played hero, there's a much wider diversity of the type of Mercy player you will encounter. And again, it's probably what we're talking about here is that, again, that dichotomy of you can be a lazy Mercy, but you can also be a sort of a grinding, hardworking Mercy, like the hardworking girl, like, because you can just pocket one person and climb and be at the same elo as the grinding, hardworking Mercy, as we might call it. I'm already disliking the terminology here, but you know, the Mercy who sort of isn't necessarily reliant on one person or their duo. And unfortunately, the way the ranked works, those are both valid. I think also this reminds me of like the main tank problem, which a lot of people come to me as well, because main tank suffers from the same issue of lack of visual cues sometimes, of like shielding the right angle doesn't necessarily, no one tells you did the right angle,
right?
And you also see a lot of main tanks complaining in like plat or whatever, like, I go in and my team never goes in with me, so what am I supposed to do? But of course the truth is that they're probably you've just probably engaged like 100 different ways wrong, like this, like 50 things you did that were just really dumb.
And this is where I feel like our impact as educators, maybe not coaches, but at least at the very least educators, is really big, because I have the same problem with Reinhardt players. Like the amount of whining I hear from Reinhardt players as I see them playing the hero. Like I just did, I took like 3 hours yesterday writing up a write-up. Reinhardt's, please, for crying out loud, clear high ground. Because, they won't follow me down main, as he walks down the middle of the main. People on high ground are like raining, fire onto his backline. No wonder they can't follow you, right? But there's this stigma with Reinhardt players. I think that's the only thing you can do is you're Reinhardt. You walk, press W1. I don't shift, guys. I'm the good Reinhardt, but that's still not good enough. Like, you're playing the hero wrong. And like with Brig as well, I'm on the front line. So like there's a lot of heroes in Overwatch. I think Brig, Rein, Mercy. I'm trying to look down the list here. I mean, those three in particular definitely. Sombra is another one as well, that people just play the hero wrong. They don't know how to play the hero fundamentally.
Diva, I think, is another one.
Oh yes, Diva, exactly. Sitting front line on Diva and just feeding ult charge, exactly. And so you get these heroes that, for whatever reason, whether they're unintuitive or they used to be played a certain way and now they're not, or the play style, or like the Mercy thing where there's not as much positive reinforcement, so people kind of get these habits. But it's not just a couple players, but like these vast communities of these players have no idea how to play their role right. And you know it because you look at the difference between a plat Mercy and a GM Mercy, and a plat Diva and a GM Diva, and it's completely different. Like LH Cloudy, the number one ranked Reinhardt in EU and NA right now. Compare his Rein to a plat Rein, they don't even look at the same hero. It's like, what is this guy doing? Like he's got to be feeding there. Like, what on earth, right? But it's completely different. Whereas you compare like a plat or diamond tracer to a GM tracer, yes, there's differences in playstyles, and obviously the GM tracer is way better in every aspect. But you can recognize it as being tracer play. You know what I'm saying? And the same thing with McCree and with Ana and so on and so on. But there are just a couple heroes in Overwatch that people just do not play right at all. And I think Mercy is one of them where they don't play it right at all. And so it leads to people feeling like it's this feeling of frustration of like, I don't know what to do, right? And I think that's like, I guess we can do our part, but it's rough, It's rough, like a lot of the times.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very, very interesting point. I can certainly speak for it on the Rein front as a sort of tank main, and as someone who has coached a lot of Rein, I can definitely speak that on the Rein front. Like, there's a lot of the majority of Reinhardts that I've ever coached have always been like, well, what am I supposed to do if my team don't come in with me? And I always, at the end of the VOD, there's always like 15 things on the list that's like, well, you could have done this different.
Yeah.
So I don't want to myself necessarily, because it's hard to categorize. Again, the Mercy community is so vast. She is the most played hero, that it's hard to like. It's very hard when you make a sweeping statement to be like, well, Mercy, people, you're playing her wrong, because there's a vast diversity of people you're talking to there, right? There's like we said, there's the hardworking Mercy, there's the pocket Mercy, there's like a whole different branches. But yeah, I'm convinced of what you're saying. Like, I think I've also been quite guilty sometimes of like giving passes to mercy play because it's like, well, yeah, your teammates were dumb there.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, maybe it is right to like demand more from sort of extracting the value wherever it can be gotten, even if it's through like non-traditional means. Because I think that's the key. I think that's what I'm actually scheduled a chat tomorrow with LH Cloudy, because I want his help with in making a Rhine guide with based off his gameplay.
Yep.
Because I think he's actually really changed how Reinhardt is seen and played.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
I think that change in playstyle comes sometimes with a hero. Like, you have to. There's like the certain tools you get with a hero, and you can either do it the traditional way, or you have to figure out if that stops working. You have to figure out the non-traditional way. That's probably
Yep.
the key to summarize this before we actually go on to doing the actual values and stuff that we're meant to be doing.
Mhm.
I think that Ryan has seen this very recently, because I've often been a traditional Reinhardt when I played. When I ever, reached top 100 that long time ago, it was being a very stable and defendable Reinhardt. Like, I personally never liked being like a crazy Reinhardt, because there's the sort of the flanky, get in your backline pin kind of Reinhardts. And there was that OG Reinhardt, which is like, if I protect and shield and block everything, my team will do the rest.
Yes.
But that, I feel, is no longer how the game operates. I don't think that space Ryan can occupy anymore, because
No.
the game has shifted.
No.
And I think that now that sort of, you have to add that aggressive streak. I think like Cloudy, Shock, and stuff like these Reinhardt players, they understand very, very intimately when to be the playmaker as well. And I think that's why personally, yeah, go ahead.
No, you finish your thought.
I was gonna say that's why personally I've been left behind, because I haven't adapted yet. Like, as me as a Reinhardt player, I haven't adapted to be like, to find those opportunities enough. I'm still sometimes stuck in the sort of be the dependable Reinhardt who doesn't feed. Whereas, yeah, what I would love to learn, and what that's why I'm trying to talk to Cloudy and get this guide out to the rest of the Ryan community as well, is understanding like, no, he is very strong. You just have to think of him differently.
Right. Exactly. And I think the thing that makes it a little confusing with all that is, but also we can simplify, is the fact that it is the same theme with Mercy not being played correctly, D.Va often not being played correctly, Rhine not being played correctly, Sombra not being played. It's all about map control. So you look at a hero like Reinhardt, who's very one-dimensional, has to stand AFK in main. Well, now we're playing against compositions and heroes, and just, I guess, the meta that is more defined around flanks and the high ground and doing this, and you're thinking about like, well, what can my hero do about that? Well, the way LH Cloudy plays the game is to better mitigate against that type of advantage in ways that other Reinhardts haven't tried. It's the same thing with D.Va. D.Va's AFK and main. Well, that's not how you play D.Va at the high level. You take angles, you take high ground, you clear out flanks, etc. Trying to think, same thing with Sombra, right? If you're just sending AFK on the enemy backline instead of like clearing out space, then you're gonna have a problem. And this is where Mercy comes into as well, because the way Mercy players, I think, struggle is not just the lack of hustle, but it's like paying attention to what's going on around them and contributing to helping people win that, if that makes any sense. Like, if you think about like what we talked about, like why Brig and Zen have been strong at the pro level, is just that. And that's why we're starting to see Mercy again starting to be picked up again with friendly metas in the pro level again, is because she can do that. With Guardian Angel and Damage Boost, you can absolutely help anything at any point in time all around the main, but a lot of Mercy's kind of getting the mindset that I'm just stuck heal beaming my tank. And that's where I think like you'll see, I guarantee if you talk with Cloudy, if you watch any of his VODs, his entire mentality is about like creating space in unorthodox ways. And Mercy needs to be doing the same thing. Mercy needs to be thinking, how can I create space by supporting somebody who is fighting for that space? That was a long segue. I apologize.
Yeah. No, I mean, I contributed to, so yeah. No, I just think it's interesting context. So, and obviously this isn't necessarily a slight on any individual Mercy, because again, going back to the whole sexism discussion, the one thing that informs this as well is, of course, the stigma of Mercy players being female, and then when they speak up, they get shit on. So it's like that you can't necessarily always be the shot caller to carry your way out because of those reasons.
And it sucks too, because we described as one of the big things of skill ceiling for Mercies is the fact that, hey, you should be scouting 24/7. Well, guess what? Maybe not the majority of your games, hopefully, but there are going to be games where you speak up, maybe give scouting, and someone's going to say, shut up, you're a female, like go back in the kitchen, and like that sucks.
Or just like shut up and pocket me, or
right,
whatever.
right, and that's part of your value. That's part of your value, just completely denied right there. And like even if it's not denied, it sure is demotivating when like some douche opens his mouth like that. So absolutely, I completely understand the issues with that. But you know, and also like we said, it's also like we harp on the mercy mains, but you know, if there is like if I had no benefit. Can you imagine playing Zenyatta without hearing a dink every single time you hit a headshot? Like that, I might not play Zenyatta as much as I do right now. So you know, maybe finding ways to motivate Mercy players to kind of make the right decisions, because there's more of that positive reinforcement. It's not a Mercy main problem. It's just the hero itself doesn't feel as rewarding in that aspect. Okay, I'm gonna get my phone really quick because my laptop's dying. Do you want to talk value floor number here?
Sure. Okay, I'll fill in and let me know when you're back. So value floor. Yeah, we were kind of disagreeing on this, or we were thinking about this, weren't we? Like, what is the when you think about who's playing the hero, what is the value floor? Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, because it depends on like who's playing the hero, right? And if we're saying if we're playing it at the skill floor, then the value floor, I think it's middling. It's sort of a middling value. You know, you're not rampantly going to take over. There's not like the carry potential, but there's a lot of value. I think particularly at sort of if you optimally time it, you can really like save someone. Again, that ability to fly in anywhere, like at a vast distance, and quickly begin a 60 heal per second. Is very, very valuable. So I think there is like, yeah, I'd say like, let's see, we got Lucio with 2, Brig is 2. I think it's the same. I think it's about the same.
I would say almost maybe a little higher, maybe. Because I think the thing with Mercy is that, like, I think you can realistically look at a Lucio and be like, hey, this hero is contributing a little more. But at the same time, I think Mercy is a little bit less restricted about when and where she can contribute to, and Lucio is.
That's a fair consideration, yeah. That's a fair consideration.
And the same thing with Brig as well. Like, if Brig is a 2, I think Mercy is a little more easy to provide value than Brig is, certainly. So... I would say not by a lot more, but maybe by a little more, like maybe a 2.5 for me.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, again, because it's like when being played at skill floor, how much value would this hero provide? So let's say like a bottom tier, you know, minimum, as in bottom tier, as in like bottom tier of skill floor. So, you know, let's say like a plat Brig versus a plat Lucio versus a plat Mercy, who's gonna give more value. Yeah, I suppose I would edge it with the Mercy, but not by much. So that's where, it becomes a bit tricky. But okay, we can go 2.5. We can go 2.5.
Okay.
I think it's not. It's a very minor thing, because we're kind of giving them, because Ana and Bap are 2.5 as well. I'm not sure I would agree that she gets the same values in Ana or Bap. I think that's like she's more than the Brig and Lucio maybe, but I think if you played an Ana at her skill floor.
Well, we also have to understand that, like, we're saying that because we assume Ana and Bap aren't going to get full values out of their kit when they're played at the floor. They're going to get...
Yeah, but I think even at its floor, it's just difficult because, I don't know. I'm okay to default to it, but I do feel like there's more visceral ways of getting value here.
Right. I think certainly ultimate is the big kind of caveat. Okay, well, here's my other thing. Actually, now that I think about it, maybe the ultimate is a little more impactful because it's a free res, because I mean people in plat aren't going to kill you while you're resing in Valk. So maybe that's like the key changer there that like prevents her from, because I was thinking like, oh yeah, well, yeah, you're right, because like, but Ana Nano is more impactful, but I mean Valk is pretty good because nobody's going to kill you in Valk and plat.
Unless you really fuck up, but yes.
Yeah, that's going to be...
Yeah, although I do see a lot of Glocks being brought out. With
that's not even skill floor. That's like skill basement. Like, at least depending on how it's being done. I don't know. I'm open for either here, honestly.
I feel like if we could cheat and go 2.2.5, like 2.25 or something.
Do it.
I think that would make me more comfortable.
Works for me. It makes sense.
So value ceiling. This is yours, I think.
I think, again, obviously, like everyone, it's meta dependent. If there is a Brawl meta coming around, she will be literally trashed here. She's one of the worst supports in Brawl because in Brawl, people tend to kind of clump up a little more, which means that there is less value to be gotten from Guardian Angel and moving around. As well as in Brawl, you have fewer high damage ranged heroes, so things like Resurrect just don't happen, and Damage Boost also doesn't happen as value because you're talking about a single beam hero. So she benefits more when people are split because nobody gets value from AoE healing then. But if you're talking about everybody's stack, heroes like Bat, Brig, Lucio, Moira even get more value over long fights. As well as, like I said, res is just not reasonable because where people die are usually closer to the enemy, so it's more risky to res. So if there's a brawl meta, her value ceiling is very low. But like looking at it from right now, like just let's assume a brawl meta isn't in going on behind the closed doors, right? I mean, I'd say she's definitely 3, maybe 3.5. Depending on the current meta right now, because if you're a really good Mercy with movement, survivability, communication, pocketing the right person at the right time, we're in a meta right now where that's very important, whether that's your Zenyatta, your Echo, your Zarya, whatever, Hanzo, Widow, Ashe, all are still pretty good DPS right now. And the other thing with Mercy as well is that she was more of a replacement to Brig, more or less, who is a little bit less of a must pick now since the ball tracer nerf. So it's less of a liability to be running a non-Brig backline. So I would say 2.5, 3. Probably I'd say 3, but again with an asterisk because like everything is very vulnerable to because she's probably one of the most vulnerable supports because she's good in spam. She's okay in hybrid dive, but she cannot be played in brawl. And I think that's what kind of separates her from the rest. She's like the antithesis of Lucio, really. Which is why when people play Mercy, Lucio, guys, listen. If I have to say one thing, I do not care what rank you are. I very rarely tell people to swap, and I don't tell people to swap, to be clear. But if you had to help me, like said, you had to tell people to swap one thing, guys. I don't mind if you play Hog Zarya. I don't mind if you play double sniper and silver. I don't care. Go for it. Just don't play Mercy Lucio, please. Like that is my one request. Avoid playing Mercy Lucio. I'm desperately it's just bad at just really any rank. But that is all. Your tanks are gonna hate you. Everybody will hate you.
it's the Orisa Zarya of support. Yeah,
it's even worse because at least Zarya can build some charge when Orisa shield breaks. But like Mercy Lucio is just like, hey, we have no healing. We have a hero that wants to like support offangles, and we have a hero that just wants to stand AFK in main, and it's a mess. So. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that is my little rant.
Yeah.
Buffs, nerfs.
And nerfs. I think there are elements to her kit which people consider changing, but I don't think it's necessarily a power level thing. I think it's more of a feeling thing. Like, I think it's more like people have a problem with res, for example, because res can be quite obnoxious in any sort of pick meta or like a sniper meta because you now have to kill someone twice, right? Like if you don't mirror the Mercy, the first pick is useless. Like they have essentially a free extra pick.
Exactly.
So like the res is like a annoying thing, and also I know even there's a large section of the Mercy community who feel like, is there a way to push her away from the pocket style? Is there a way to discourage the lazy Mercy? Right? Like we spoke about the lazy Mercy, the hard working Mercy dichotomy. Is there a way to push towards the hard working Mercy and discourage the lazy Mercy pocket one guy?
Yeah.
I don't think she necessarily needs buffs, nerfs. I think it's more like there are some aspects of the kit that could be looked at.
True. I agree with that. See, to me, it's like even I don't want to like open this discussion up any further, but like even the whole like the pocket playstyle, that's just how I play Mercy. Well, that's because the pocket playstyle is how you play Mercy, but it's always dependent on the battlefield. Like you can look at any VOD of any Mercy that's playing properly, and who they are pocketing is constantly changing. Good Mercies never just right-click beam their Genji boyfriend. That's not how you play Mercy. If Genji's got a good angle or has blade, sure, but the rest of the team fight, you need to be looking at the team fight. So, like, I actually think Mercy's pretty interactive at the highest level anyway. But I can definitely see, like, maybe, like we talked about, something that, like, makes it more rewarding when you're doing the right thing. Res is always a can of worms in that regard, even now. So yeah, I don't think buffs or nerfs, but definitely would be open to some discussion about some adjustments about some of how her abilities interact for sure.
Yeah, so I've seen some interesting thingies. Again, whenever again going back to that content creator patch, I'm always trying to soft encourage things in the players because I know that there's only so much like educators can do, right? There's only so much guide makers can do because only a fraction of people playing the game will ever even seek out a guide, right? Like a very small fraction. Probably.
Well, speak for yourself. I'm gonna have 150,000 viewers next week, guaranteed.
Sorry. At least my guys. Nobody's looking for them. So I think it becomes sort of if you want your game to be played better, then you need to kind of give soft encouragement to your players to like do one thing over the other, right? Because again, it's
Right.
like if they are not guided, they'll probably just default to whatever is the most easy way to do. Again, the Reinhardt will just shield down main and walk forwards. The Lucio will just like sit there and with his aura on. And the D.Va will just fly and be sort of like, let me just use micro missiles, DM, and just like fly towards the first person I see, and then like die inevitably because I dove right in. So I had one idea, which is a beam degeneration, which is basically the longer the beam stays on one target, it degenerates its value. So like from a max to a min. So
Interesting.
if it's on the same target, it starts at 60 HPS and it degenerates to like 40 HPS in like a certain period of time.
So what you've done
to change that, you have to change target basically.
Sorry for interrupting, but what you've done is you've done the exact same thing that you've done with your Lucio, where you've seen lower rank, mid rank players say, "Why are you so lazy just pocketing one person? That's not how you play this hero. At least very rarely is it how you play this hero. So now we're going to force you to play properly by rewarding you to do it elsewhere." Because it's almost like a more visual example. Because if you're only pocketing one person, you're going to get punished, but you might not even know that you're being punished.
That's the thing.
That's the thing. And I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. I think that I can respect it. Even I don't know if that would work or not, but I would be very interested to see that. And I really like the idea.
Yeah, so that was one idea that's how I approach it anyways. If I was a game dev, that's how I would approach it. It's like soft discouragement, right? Like soft coding is what you might call it, like pushing people away from something. And I think another idea that I know EVA has like a very detailed document on potential Mercy changes, and I believe that she advocated for something called angelic. Like she had some ideas like general reworks, but I think in terms of the res thing, she said if we want to remove res, if we feel that it's let's say an unfun ability, then my suggestion would be angelic blessing, which is so it replaces res and it basically allows the Mercy to give one person a charge of Guardian Angel for like, let's say like 6 seconds. So like you use Angelic Blessing and you give this person like visually it looks like wings on their back. And for 6 seconds, they now have one use of Guardian Angel.
All I can think of is a Reinhardt with wings.
Yeah, with wings, just like flying over. That would actually be quite comical.
That would be funny.
Like a fortified Orisa flying over, like just very, very stoically.
Yeah, that would be.
But
hilarious.
yeah, I mean, I'm always down for cool ideas, and I think I'd be down to try it. Like,
sure, give it
what
a
does
shot.
that look like in a world where Guardian Angel is like something you can give to someone else for a bit?
It's an interesting idea, and I think it would be fun if nothing else, just to see. And I think ultimately it's like nobody's like a professional developer here, and even the pros are gonna have a million. Hey, this was a great idea, but this actually sucks. Like this isn't good at all. So
that's how I feel about most of my ideas.
Yeah, you're right. So you might as well try it. You never know. So
yeah, I'm down to give it a shot. I think that's Of course, the devs are probably doing this on an internal level, but we can only ever we don't have that same level of access, right? Because we don't have an internal testing team ready to try it out, so we have to like throw stuff out and yeah. Anyways, so I think she's fine as is. I think we can maybe put an asterisk in terms of like if certain people have certain problems with parts of the kit, then they could be looked at. But I think, and I think there's also discussion right now about like whether 60 HPS is too much and whether that needs to be pulled down. But
yeah, see, to me, I think like going from 60 to 58 HPS or whatever, this tiny little buffs, I don't think it has like a huge impact on like why you play the hero or why you wouldn't. Like it's kind of like, to me, that's like kind of like buffing Reinhardt's swing damage from 75 to 80. It's like it's like I don't think it really impacts so much of like what you'd want to discuss more about the hero. It's like, unfortunately, I think you have to go for more high risk, high reward balance changes in terms of like some fun, like kind of what you suggested, some of those kind of like, well, that's kind of weird, but maybe that might pay off, because I think anything else is just like, it's not going to matter. Like for example, the Moira fade ability, what they did in PTR a little while back. I think that's like we're going to talk more about that with Moira, but I think like that's kind of
let's.
But okay.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that. But yeah, fun against. It's hard to say because you're never really up against the Mercy. You're usually up against the person she's helping.
Yeah, I would say probably a 2.5. I know in higher ranks especially, Resurrect and Damage Boost is a little more impactful, a little more annoying to deal with for sure. Lower ranks, I don't think Mercy is obnoxious to play against really at all. I think she just kind of is there. I think the more powerful aspects of her kit are exploited more in higher ranks. Similarly to Bap, I think, like lamp, window, mobility, those are things that make Bap tough to play against and annoying to play against, and you don't see that till higher ranks. And I think the same thing kind of goes with Mercy, with like the resurrect and the exploding damage boost, and even, I mean, not to be that guy, but utilizing pistol and Valk properly. That's something that becomes a lot more problematic in higher ranks, because Mercies are better at kind of reading the battlefield and deciding when that's necessary, and nobody likes dying to a Valking Mercy.
Oh yeah, that's the biggest disrespect you can get. Or Baby Diva.
It's the worst. It's awful. So I don't know, 2 or 2.5 for me. I'm unsure. I'm open to suggestions.
Yeah, I'm feeling there as well. I think it's like it just wildly varies, because I quite enjoy it if I'm like a Winston or something. I'm trying to chase the Mercy down. It's like a skill matchup, right? Because she's gotta like time her GAs properly, and I'm gonna try and make sure I don't jump before she GAs over. Like I've got to try and it's like, it's like a fun interaction. Or same with like a Tracer, right, where you're trying to get in between her Guardian Angels. But I know that like for some other people it's like, oh, it's so obnoxious, like if she's behind the corner with like, enabling XYZ, like I can't do anything, or the res, like nobody's interrupting the res, or blah blah blah, and obviously the Valk. So I'd say like 2.5 is fair. I think maybe 2.5 is fine.
Sure.
I don't think she's as bad as it gets.
Agreed.
By any means.
Agreed. Okay. Well, here comes another big one. It's ironic about this one is I feel like, even though we're talking about how it's a big one, I think we're going to be in agreement with this entire list. I think we're actually going to crank through this list pretty fast. I think Moira is a very problematic hero, but I don't think her problems are very difficult to understand. I think she's very simple. Yeah. Like skill floor. Like as low as it gets, like or as high as it gets. Like even though the hero is like not particularly oppressively strong, I think it is incredibly easy to understand parts of her kit. Coalescence, ridiculously easy to understand. The resource management is a little tricky. Right clicking, not hard to understand. Fade usage is very intuitive. People talk about, I always get this, what about fade jumps? Well, you don't need to know fade jumps at a skill floor, and we'll talk about that with sealing as well. I think the only tricky part with Moira that maybe prevents her from being Bastion level is Orb. And I did a video on Orb, and I don't think it's a particularly crazy hard cooldown to use, but it does take some thought. Are you going to get ult charge with it? Are you going to clear out an angle? Are you going to save it for mid-fight resource for your team? So I think honestly, Orb alone might prevent Moira from being a 1 for me, but it's gonna be, I'm more leaning 1 or 1.25 this year, because it just doesn't get much lower.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like I would probably say on balance Bastion is easier, right? There's just less to his kit. It's like turret mode, self-heal. Right. Like that's literally it. Right. Whereas I guess Moira does there's more going on, right? There's the resource management, there's the orb, there's the cold, like there's different elements. So compared to Bastion, she's probably got a higher skill floor, but we just said that Mercy probably has a higher skill floor than Moira too. So
yeah, I'm feeling 1.25 honestly.
Yeah, we can cheat, as we frequently seem to be doing.
12.5, wow.
Yeah, well, the hardest hero in the game by 3 times as much as Tracer.
Oh gosh. All right.
Yeah, skill ceiling. Again, I think even like you mentioned fade jumping. I'm like, how often is fade jumping necessary?
Exactly.
Like, where are you going? Where are you going with the fade jump? That's gonna make it better for you as Moira.
Yeah.
So, I struggle to see. Let me just compare, because I'm just thinking like how low we go essentially is dependent on like where we've gone.
I don't think we've ever really gone low with ceiling.
Bastion is 1.5. Bastion is 1.5.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I think this is one of those cases where to climb with this hero, if you were playing like the ladder game, you're gonna have to start doing weird and unorthodox things. Like you'd have to be the flank Moira in the back line and like, just relentlessly dueling their supports or their DPS. So it's like you can be quite crazy with it, and you can get value in some pretty crazy ways. But I think in terms of like the discrepancy between when you've understood this hero versus when you've mastered the nuances of this hero is not that deep. It's not that far, I don't think.
No. There's just too many. And the thing with Moira is she's also very top heavy with it as well. Like the vast majority of it is like, don't waste your fade and being a little smart with your orb usage. But there's no real major difference between low tier and high tier coalescence usage. There's some resource management adjustments, but there's nothing major with that. There's not like you have to choose, like look at, for example, right click. The only thing I can say is that, being able to spam your right click and or maybe prioritize squishies over tanks, but there's so little to it. Like, okay, it's a little harder to aim, but the ability still itself isn't hard because it does so low damage, it has so low range that there's just nothing to it. Like I would be hard pressed to say anything higher than a 1.5, honestly.
Yeah, I think so. I think if Bastion is 1.5, it's about the same level of like, I think the discrepancy there is about the same. Like,
Agreed.
I think we gave Bastion a 1.5 instead of a 1 because like to extract value at to do the crazy stuff you might need to do at GM, you need to have a bit more sophistication. And I think that's the same. Yeah, and I think it's the same sort of principle. Another sort of anecdotal thing that I'd bring to this is, when I do what's called the unlucky challenge, where I put players in a lobby full of players in a rank higher than where they currently are, right? So the players who think that they deserve to be in a higher rank, the golds who think they deserve to be master, or the plats who think they deserve to be GM, and I put them in the lobby with those GMs and the masters. I don't think I've seen as many heroes get carried, like as many players get carried as the Moira players. Like I think without fail, I can think of at least 3 or 4 where they won, but I was just sitting there like, wow, you never have your healing resource up. You literally never have it up, and you still won.
Yeah.
So I think she's like the easiest hero to like get carried on, which is I think a demonstration of the fact that even if you waste a bunch of her crap, you're still getting like. Actually, that might be a bit of a value thing, but still,
still. I think
it kind of feeds into that.
Yeah, for sure. It's like you have like that 52, like you by playing perfectly as Moira, you increase your chance of winning the game by like 4%. Whereas with like any other support hero, you're going to be getting like 15 or 20 or 30%. And Moira, it's like, hey, it's so easy to get carried. I mean, on average, you're still going to climb if you're good, or you're still going to drop if you're bad, but you're slowing the process down so much because your impact is so low. Value floor for me is like. This is a little tricky for me because I don't think she's as oppressively strong as she once was, but I certainly think that like so my one caveat with this is I think Cole's easy to use, heal is easy to use, fade is easy to use, so I don't expect Moira's will do it probably, but I'm concerned about resource management with a Moira. Like if I'm playing with like a gold Moira as plat Moira and I'm playing main tank, I'm a little concerned. Because I'm expecting them to run out of healing in like the first like 10 seconds of the fight. So maybe I'm like, this hero is really easy, but I also know this hero is not very good. And there is just enough of a little bit of a skill floor, and that prevents them just rolling their face across their keyboard and doing something. So I might actually put her at like a 2.5 on floor.
Yeah.
Because Cole is just really strong. Just really, really strong compared to other support ultimates in like medium low ranks. But I would rather have a bad Bap than a bad Moira in like a mid-fight kind of situation. Maybe even a bad Ana, honestly. I guess at least the longer the fight goes, certainly.
Yeah, so the funny thing is, just looking back at the Bastion thing, I think we've kind of slightly changed our metric a little bit, because we gave Bastion a 4, because I think the argument we gave was basically internal to this hero, like what's the value they're giving you at all times, which is like 4. Like, it's like you're getting value of Bastion compared to the max of him all the time.
Right.
Because like if you're in Bastion mode, he's 4 all the time. So I think we kind of changed that to count the meta in this. When we've been doing supports, we've been kind of keeping the meta in perspective, which is fine. I just want to point out that we kind of changed that a little bit,
for sure,
because otherwise I think Moira would be very high, like 3.5, because it's like you're getting value as Moira. If you're in terms of like the Moira play, you're getting value. If you're picking Moira, as long as you're not like a complete dunderhead, if you're using your abilities, you're getting value. But when you factor the meta into it, that drops, because
it's
what's
weird.
Being played, it just doesn't help her.
It's weird because, like you said, it's like you're playing the hero to maybe a high level degree, but the value is so low that it doesn't even matter that much. So like you look at Bastion, I'm like, value floor, like you're doing everything that Bastion can be doing, but Bastion's also dad, so maybe that value floor should be a lot lower, just because Bastion is not a particularly oppressive hero. But at the same time, at least with Bastion, when you are on the floor ranks, like everybody has, oh no, they've got a Bastion. We're in gold. You know what I'm saying? And I think there's less of that with Moira than there is with Bastion. There's less of that, like, I'm going to dominate the entire team fight. You guys better watch out. You have to do everything to counter me, otherwise you're going to lose. And I think Moira is a little less of that category. Like, Moira is like, okay, they have cold, that's pretty scary. But like outside of that, like even as a flanker now with her right click nerf, you're less concerned about Moira as a pick. So I think that justifies her value floor certainly being lower than 4.
Yeah. I think in the new metric, even I think like 2.5, maybe 3. I would say
sure.
Out of all the supports, she's probably getting the most value at the floor level.
Yeah,
right. Like
I agree.
You're outputting the most. So I think 3 is probably fair compared to like Ana, Bap.
That's fair. And I think the lion's share that does come from her ult, which I think is very, very good.
I find that like her ult comes up around the same time people run out of resources. Like,
yep.
It's like this big saving thing. Because if it wasn't the case, if the ult like was something completely different, right? It didn't recharge her meter or stop her needing to heal, we'd be in a whole different world with Moira. Because I see it all the time.
Yep.
Like people are like, they're like, there's bars 0 and they're like 95%, and they throw that last orb out and then they get the coal out and then it refreshes the chain.
Yep.
So
Yep, that's true. That's a good point. But yeah, value ceiling. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, she's like really not great. Again, she's a hero that lives and dies by the meta, right? Like she just cannot interact with certain metas. That being said, yeah, like you point out earlier, she was one of the bizarre heroes being picked in double shield because of her ability to go through shields with her coalescence.
Yeah, during the Reaper Doom meta. Well, to be fair, the majority of the reason why she was picked during that meta in particular was because she had a defensive cooldown. When you were playing Reaper Doom, if you didn't have a defensive cooldown, you're gonna get pull punched, and if you couldn't fade it, you're gonna die. Ana, Brig, it didn't matter. You're going to die. And you have to remember that like Brig was still strong then, and she wasn't picked because she didn't have a defensive cooldown. Like she's gonna get punched, and if she doesn't have bash to counterpunch, she's going to die. And eventually, you're gonna not have bash, and you're gonna die. So that's really, it wasn't just because of like Cole, because that was obviously Cole was a very big ultimate in that meta, but you couldn't play anything but Moira without dying to Reaper Doom.
Yes. Yeah. No, glad you brought that up, because again, this is where your insight is very valuable, of like you actually having coached these things.
Right, but you are right
exactly
though.
What was going on.
Your Cole was a big deal in that. Continue.
Yeah, so no, I'm just thinking like, other than that, like basically the times we've seen Moira get played, which is obviously always a good indicator of whether a character is giving you the value ceiling or not, was like pre-Rollock when it was Slambulance comps and that double shield meta. And I think maybe we'll see a return in Brawl, but I'm not even convinced that like I'm not convinced that she'd be the go-to. How do you feel like even if Brawl was to return?
No, because the heroes that demand her to be picked aren't strong enough right now. So like Reaper Doom, those heroes aren't strong enough right now. Maybe we see more Reaper, but it would have to Reaper, Doom, or Sombra. One of those 3, and to a lesser extent Tracer, would have to be oppressive in Brawl comps for that hero to be picked. We had that lineup for a brief period of time in like October or September, where we had Winston Diva, Reaper Sombra, Moira Lucio, and she was picked because, hey, if you're playing Ana, or Bap or Zen or whatever, you're gonna die to Reaper Sombra Monkey. Like it's just over and over and over again. So, but like the stars really have to align for her, and just simply Brawl's meta is not good enough, because if it's a Brawl meta with Kree, if it's a Brawl meta with like an Ashe, if it's even like a Brawl meta with Reaper Mei, like if that Reaper isn't like TPing off of cooldown and killing that Moira, you're better off playing Bap or better off playing Ana. And even an Ana isn't just an insta kill against just a Reaper, right? It would have to be literally double flanker or double dive DPS Brawl with Reaper Doom, Sombra, whatever, to justify it. Because if you go like Reaper Mei or Doomfist Mei, you're a little bit worried about your Ana or your BAP, but it's just the one DPS that you're worried about. It's when double DPS become a problem, that's when you see Moira, and it's a very specific niche. Outside of that, like she's as bad as Lucio in terms of like actual contribution.
Yeah.
And the difference between Moira and Lucio is Moira is not even a must pick in Brawl. So she's not a must pick in any meta, in any situation, except for very, very specific niche Brawl type. So, and that's because, you know, if we hold her up to the standards, in my opinion, if we hold her up to the standards of the Brig and Zen in terms of contributing to DPS angles, winning map control, she brings literally nothing to the table. At least Lucio has speed. You know, at least Bap and Ana have some form of range. She has nothing. She's a Brawl hero with no range and extremely limited mobility. And even her utility is, hey, I survive. You know, I don't damage boost, I don't pocket, you know, I don't, you know, bash, boop.
Yeah, exactly.
I do nothing. I just survive. And so the hero itself is, in my opinion, I think Moira and Bastion are the two worst design heroes in Overwatch, unquestionably. I know Samito is probably molding at me that I'm not bringing up Brig, but like in their current state right now, I think Moira and Brig or Bastion, excuse me, are the worst design heroes in Overwatch because they don't bring anything to the table. And for that, I think Value Sing is probably a 1. Let me look at Bastion to make sure. Yeah, I would say on par with Bastion is more than fair. Maybe you could argue a 1.5.
I'd say 1.5. I'd say
Okay.
1.5 just for the factor where like she can be meta. Like I've never seen Bastion be meta other than like in Crazy Cheese.
That's true.
You know, with Sim TP.
Yeah, that's true.
I think like the fact that there is and has been a time when Moira was the pick, even if it was a very niche time, indicates that there is some slight value to her coming in. But yeah,
that's true. And this is where we get to the really important part, I think, for Moira. Now, we obviously don't think we have time to go in detail here, but we can see the discrepancy right now. Skill ceiling, value ceiling, well, what we expect, right? That's quote unquote balanced, right? But the value floor and skill floor, that's where we have problems. And I think that's where we would want to discuss. And honestly, like I would love to not have a hero have a 1.5 value ceiling. Like I don't like that. I mean, it's balanced, but I don't love it. So like, what do you think?
See, this is tricky. I think I'm totally happy with Moira's kind of idea in the game, which is a middling hero. Like I think middling heroes are totally fine and
Sure.
maybe even good for the game, where it's like this hero will never be more than mediocre. Like, you know, you pick her up and she's mediocre, you master her and she's mediocre, and that's good for, you know, what we might pejoratively call the casuals. Like if you're someone who's struggling, just pick Moira and do you.
Yeah.
But there's still something about it which feels like they could do more. Basically, they could do more. I don't know what the more would be, because I feel like she's one of the heroes, the way she's designed, because she has nothing to offer other than healing and staying alive. Really, like the damage is not a factor in that sense. It's not like threatening damage. It's more like random bits of prodding,
right?
Apart from coalescence.
Yeah.
So I think that the problem is that if you buff her in any way, all you ever do is make her healing oppressive. So I don't really know how she would be changed. I think she's okay, to be honest, as like this middling non-entity of a hero.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it makes sense. Like, I think if we're honest with the fact, okay, we're just gonna have a middling hero. Overwatch is okay to be balanced around middling heroes. Especially if we're hoping to get more heroes involved in the hero pool, then sure, like she does the job, she fits the role, fine. If we want to try and force some form of, hey, this hero needs to be good, we need every hero to have, then she needs some form of utility, aside from just survival. So I think it's like either she's middling and that's just how she is and we're happy with that, or we try and force more heroes to be viable, in which case she needs something other than healing or damage buffs. She needs to be more like more impactful apart from just the
There's
raw.
more to her,
right?
More to her,
right? That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I think
I think they tried to do that with the resource meter, but it just doesn't quite work out the way they planned it.
And the tricky thing with her is too is if you are going to buff or nerf her, I think you'd have to nerf her and her contribution in lower rings. But you wouldn't want to nerf her by much, and you would you couldn't nerf her in a way that would really significantly impact her in higher rings because she's already so bad as it is. So it's like it's awkward, like, you know. And again, I'm like wondering, is she that oppressive at lower ranks? Like she's clearly got a high value floor, but is she like oppressive? And I'm not sure.
I don't think so.
Maybe not.
I think
since
the
right
other
click
factor.
nerf.
I think the other factor that I think players, particularly when we talk about player behavior, to think about is players are often very conscious about not just the short term, but the long term. Like it might be a problem if players were only thinking about winning the actual physical next game they're in. If
Yeah.
it was like a chessboard, right? And
Yep.
Moira was a piece you could throw in, it would be a big problem because you could just in any particular match put in the Moira piece, win that match, move on, and have lost nothing.
Right. The trump
But
card. Yeah.
yeah, but the difference is that players are often thinking, well, I'm not just playing a hero one game. I want a master hero to climb the ranks overall.
Right.
And that hard cap of a value ceiling, I think, is kind of preventing a lot of like a vast amount of Moira mains from kind of exploding onto the scene.
Right.
Because they all know as well, if I pick Moira, I'm going to cap out in diamonds. I'm going to struggle. So I may as well, like, why shouldn't I have just picked a different support, struggled through plat, learned and gotten better, and then I'll have something to take with me.
And we've been spending a lot of time not ripping on, but kind of criticizing community perceptions. And maybe we found one that is actually accurate, that is actually like kind of nailed the head, right on it, and is definitely, like, I think in a good way, because it is discouraging people from one tricking Moira. Like in times past was a thing. A lot of players did do that. And then I think slowly that stigma has kind of been like, hey, this here, good luck with that. This doesn't work. And it's true. It's true. And it's nice to actually see, a stigma that's actually like deserved and in a way almost beneficial. Like I like seeing the fact that Ana has such a high pick rate in lower ranks, even though we consider her to be a harder hero. Like I like to see that. So, yeah, I think buffs and nerfs probably mostly leave untouched. Until we kind of figure out like what the Blizzard's developer design is, or idea, philosophy is on the hero. One thing I do want to compliment them on is nerfing right click made her value floor, or like it definitely increased her skill floor a little bit. And the big thing too is it made it like, hey, lower rank Genjis and Tracers can actually have a chance of beating this guy. And not just, hey, this person looked in my general direction and now I'm instantly dead. Like that's just so frustrating. And I think that was a really, really good change for, like, I think the health of lower ranks. I don't think it's insignificant at all.
Yeah, I think actually a good question in chat is about like the fade thing that they introduced in the PTR. And I think that was interesting. That was like a direction to take her, where if you wanted to give her, which I guess indicates that the devs are pondering, well, should we give Moira something else? Because that would have been, now there's utility. Now there's like a reason to pick her.
Whether that would have been busted or not, it doesn't matter. That's the type of thing Moira needs, is something other than heal and damage. Some sort of, like, it was a purge, right?
Yeah, it's like it just brought everyone out, and I think people were like, going crazy. I wouldn't say overreacting, because we never really got to test it meaningfully, so we don't know whether it was an over or under reaction. But yeah, it was like Sigma Flux, and she just fades everyone out, kind of thing.
Right. So I can see why people freaked out, but at least that's kind of the direction, or some form of utility. That's what she needs if we're gonna make this hero relevant. So at least they're aware that that's a problem. And maybe this is just a Bastion example where they're like, what, the hero is not oppressive, the hero is just dumb. We're gonna leave it there, and then we'll revisit it in Overwatch 2. So who knows?
Yeah, actually thinking about it, they've tried a couple times, because they had that change initially with Fade when she could fade when she was stunned. Do you remember that little brief period?
Yeah, you couldn't kill her.
That was nightmarish. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but at least it indicates that they were looking. They are probably looking in some degree of like, can we make more and more interesting?
Yeah,
but that wasn't it, Chief.
No,
anyway,
not it.
Fun against.
I just think it doesn't get much lower. Like, Coalescence is a really annoying ultimate, even if you don't, like, it's not particularly strong. It's just loud and visually obnoxious, and just it feels low effort. I mean, generally we find heroes that are lower skill to be less fun against, because whenever you die to a Moira, you're like, man, this stupid idiot, like, they didn't even try, like, what? And so I think a Moira might honestly be like a 1, maybe like a 1.5, because her impact isn't that big. But honestly, like, even though she's not very good, nobody likes dying to Moira, nobody likes Coalescence, nobody likes Damage Orb at all. Fade is annoying to deal with. Like, I can't think of a single part of Moira's kit that's even right click, which has a little more skill than it used to. It's like, it still requires a lot less mechanics than a lot of other heroes when it comes to like actual execution. So I think you can make an argument for 1.5, but I'm on the fence. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think let's be a bit more decisive. I think there's an easy kind of cop out of like always mediating, but I think as you said, I don't think there's an aspect of Moira's kit where you're like, yeah, respect, bro. You did
Yeah,
it.
there's
You did it. Like,
nothing.
you got me good.
Yeah,
Like, there's nothing that's like,
yeah,
you just held right click and you threw an orb my way. Thanks.
yeah, yeah.
Of course, and the Moira deathmatch pickers are as bad as it gets. The Moira and Roadhog deathmatch pickers, those guys, you guys have no fun.
Shame on you.
You guys have no fun
Shame
in
on you.
this game.
And they don't. And the Moira's like they don't even win deathmatch. They just ruin it for everybody. That's the thing.
Yeah,
Like,
they just
the
don't
hero's not
die.
even
They just
good.
like don't die.
Yeah, exactly. The hero's not good, but it doesn't make it fun to play against. So,
Yeah.
okay. Well, wrapping it up.
Boy Zenyatta.
I think this is me. So I'll be glad to take over. My boy Zenyatta, indeed. I have like 450 hours in this hero. It's like my most played hero. So, skill floor for Zenyatta is I actually think it's pretty high. I think he's a hero that is very easy to screw up if you play it incorrectly, if you don't understand like what you're doing. You have to have proper positioning. You have to have at least somewhat decent mechanics. You can't like stay like we said like, hey, Honest can stand behind Ryan and shoot up the Reinhardt's button. It might work out. With Zenyatta, it's like you can definitely just kind of get some value out of spamming in the enemy team's direction. But the second that there's a Widow in the field, a Tracer in the field, a Pharmacy in the field, like it no longer is a question of just spam the general direction. Now you're going to get hard punished if you can't hit shots. And Ana doesn't necessarily have to shoot a Tracer, as Zenyatta does. And I think that goes for a lot of the different matchups to where Zenyatta is going to be actively pressured, so he also has to be able to defend himself by actually hitting shots.
Yeah.
I do think that Trance is not a super hard ultimate to use, but it's harder than Cole, it's harder than Valk, it's harder than Rally. I don't think it's quite as hard.
It's a little bit misunderstood as well, I think, because it's changed its nature. Again, like we spoke about earlier, like it used to be that Beat and Transcendence were like these must-have ultimates, because this was like back when Zarya's was getting played more, so it was like a lot of grabs. You counter the grab with a Transcendence or a Beat. Whereas now, like, it's much more dynamic, I think, when you use Transcendence, because it's very rarely the occasion where you're like, I'm saving this to counter this enemy ult.
Exactly.
You actually have to be a lot more dynamic with it than I think you once were, and I don't think people have necessarily caught on.
No, and I think it's also, like, I hate to keep bringing this point back up, but as teams have gotten better at understanding map control and flanks and angles, you're not trancing a big 6-man grab. If your team gets 6-man grab, they're screwed
dead.
Up.
Yeah,
they screwed up. They should not have been. They should not have been where they could have gotten 6, or even like to an extent Nanoblade. Like, we should be spread out. Like, obviously dash resets, etc. But like in general, like the big fat trance and that massive May Blizzard that caught 5 people, like that just should just not happen anymore. And even at the floor level. So I think like that's not. There is a little bit of a flexibility with how to use the ultimate. I think Harmony Orb is actually pretty tricky to use. I think Harmony Orb is certainly like, it's a simple cooldown to understand, but it's very difficult to like read the battlefield. It's very similar to Armor Pack and its application. I actually think the one relatively easy thing about Zenyatta is I think Discord is pretty intuitive. And it's also not, it's something that you can weave very easily between shots. You really just Discord who you or your team is shooting. I do coach Discord usage a little bit, but if I see bad Discord usage, I'm more shocked more than anything else. I'm like, come on, how can you mess this up?
Well, yeah.
So I think like Harmony.
It'd be weird. It'd be weird to Discord one guy and then turn your attention and shoot someone else. Right? That would be a very
that's
bizarre occurrence.
Exactly. So that's usually the one really fairly easy part of Zenyatta. I think positioning's hard. I think mechanics are hard. I think his Harmony is pretty tricky, and I think his ultimate isn't easy either. I think I would rather have a Zen on my team than maybe a bad or a skill floor Widow, maybe, but I don't know. Like I would say at least a 3 or a 3.5 with him. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is tricky, isn't it? I think because I think 3 is fair, because I think with a Widowmaker 3.5, it's like she will literally do nothing, like if she sat there and not hitting shots. Whereas you can still Harmony, you can still Discord.
Yep, that is true.
And Transcendence will do something when you do it. Like
exactly. Yeah.
So I think 3 is fair, probably.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's fair. I mean, that's the highest skill floor I think we've gotten to support yet. So I think that's more than fair. Which
is fair, I think, because he is the most. I think partly with skill floor as well. Like particularly if anyone ever comes from it from a ladder perspective, surviving is really difficult to support. Like that is the be all and end all as a support. Like if you're not alive, you're not doing your job as a support.
Right. So the highest
surviving is hardest on Zenyatta.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, Ceiling, your thoughts?
I think this is high as well. I think it's high as fuck. I think evidenced by the fact that the best support players ever have always been the Zenyatta players, like Jonak and Violet, like are the two sort of support players who stand out as like the best support players we've ever seen in the league, and 2 of the 3 seasons MVPs, because I think they're the sort of innately Zenyatta. I mean, obviously Violet spent a lot of time on BAP as well, but I think there's obviously all the elements we've talked about. Who you're harmoning, who you're discording, who you're shooting, and when you're positioning, but also like landing the percentage of the shots is like so radically different in sort of your impact, that if you're landing, like if you want, like when Jonak plays, it's like every shot is like a dink, and that's why he's like ridiculous, because he's like got that level of control over the hero. So yeah, I think 3.5, 3.
Yeah, I think 3.5 for sure. I think the thing about Zenyatta that is lost upon a lot of people as well, and this is honestly, I come across as egotistical when I say that, but honestly, like just recently something I've been paying attention to, even as a coach for years, is like how Harmony and to an extent Discord is, like we talk about how Discord at a floor is not hard to use, but when we start talking about like ceiling wise, especially in the recent meta we talked about with Ball Tracer, like I'm coaching GM Zenyatas and even contenders Zenyatas, and they're not using it right at all. Like and it's hard. Like you have to like read the battlefield and be like, okay, who do I need to be discording? Like who's got the most impact right here? Okay, so very much similar to how we discussed Mercy about who you're pocketing. Same kind of thing with Zenyatta, but now you also have to incorporate positioning, which is a little bit trickier than it is with Mercy, and you have to incorporate mechanics, which is significantly trickier than Mercy. So I don't think Harmony and Discord. I think actually Harmony and Discord get harder to use the higher up in rank that you go. And at the same time, the positioning is just as important, if not more important, and mechanics as well. So I think, if anything, he does get higher up. I think the skill ceiling of 3.5 is more than fair.
Yeah, I agree. Value floors, and that's you.
So I think Zenyatta is a fine hero. I think, like, obviously if there are going to be circumstances where you are not doing a lot as Zenyatta because you are dying off a cooldown, like Sombra Tracers, balls, things like that. But I don't think that is something that happens all the time. Maybe 1 out of every 10 games you're dying off a cooldown, your team is flaming you, and you're just not doing anything. But the majority of the time, like, you're going to be under some pressure. You might need to position, but if you're playing at the skill floor like decently, you'll be doing a decent amount. You won't be popping off. Maybe you scuff up your trances. Maybe you're not hitting a lot of shots, but you'll be at least getting some spam done. Your Harmony and Discord will get something done. Trance won't be completely worthless. So like, I look at Zen and I'm like, compared to him to like an Ana or a BAP, maybe comparable, like a 2.5, maybe, because I don't think he's a bad hero when played like on the floor. I'm inclined to agree, but at the same time, my mind is saying like the one caveat to that is that he's the most exploitable as well as a consequence. So it's like, yeah, true.
Compared to Ana and BAP, where it's like, if we're talking floor level, everybody's playing at a floor level. It's like these guys would probably do better than a Zen if like everyone's trying to exploit him. So maybe it would go like 2.
Yeah,
for that reason.
Fair too. That's fair as well. It just depends. The thing that makes it tricky is because like a lot of, like, if they're playing like Kree and like, even like an Ashe or like Echo, like Zen's fine. Like he's not gonna have any major issues.
Yeah.
But it's like
the ball and the tracer.
Right.
Really...
As soon as you incorporate that ball, Sombra Tracer, then we start to have issues about bad Zenyatas. They kind of fall to pieces. So I'm not sure, honestly. I'm up to suggestions here.
We could go 2.2.
Yeah, we haven't cheated in it. We haven't cheated in the whole category. So
we've been good. We've been good for a while.
All right. All right. Value ceiling.
This is really high. Like he's been a sort of central pillar in the majority of the recent metas we've seen because of the value of his damage output and the Discord output. Like it's just so strong. And again, like we said, when DPS duels have been so defining to what's going on in a match, a guy who can basically swing it 2 ways, it's not just one way, it's 2 ways, right? He's harmoning one guy and discording the other guy. If you're not mirroring that, you're in a world of trouble.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's really high.
Yeah.
I think probably the highest.
I think it's very high. I think Zenyatta...
I think 3.5 might. If we're judging the others as 3.
Right, but we also, again, we have to asterisk it, unfortunately, because, again, if Brawl does come up, you're not going to see Zen. Because the fights, like, the flank control isn't as contested, so the Harmony and Discord provide a little less value, as well as you do need the Lucio, of course, So are you going to play Zen Lucio Brawl? Like you're even the most disciplined of Ryan is going to need a little more support than that.
Yeah.
So it's like he doesn't really fit the Brawl archetype very well because you need a main healer, Ana, Moira, Bap, and he just doesn't do enough healing because you have to have Lucio. You just have to have Lucio. But you can see him sometimes in dive for sure. Like we've seen some Briggs in dives. You've seen a little bit of Bap Zen and spam, Zen Mercy and spam hybrid with dive. So he's not a tunneled support for sure. But I think 3.5 contingent upon the fact that we do stay within DPS pokier style comps where Harmony and Discord is absolutely busted.
Yeah. Fair. Buffs and nerfs. So this is you.
Don't touch him. Don't touch him. He's balanced. Like I think if maybe you could consider they just nerfed Discord. I don't know what you'd even nerf about him if you were to nerf him. Like Discord is already, maybe you'd nerf Discord another 5%, maybe. What is it, like 25% now to 20%? It would still be it would still be impactful. It wouldn't be as busted, but I don't even know if that's necessary. I would just leave honestly Zenyatta as it is. You can't nerf his trance. It's you obviously can't nerf his survivability. And Harmony is already like very, very low as it is. So I think you just leave him as it is.
Yeah, I think we look at our stats, they check out, right? Like he's got a high skill floor, high skill ceiling, and consequently a high value ceiling. If anything, his value floor is less than his skill floor, but
yep.
I think that's fine as well. Nobody has a problem with that per se. Like you know what you're getting with Zen. I think he's like chef's kiss of design in that sense. In that
exactly,
he's been fundamentally the same kind of hero since his launch, and he works. He's got like a clear benefit and a clear downside. So I think he's good. I think he's good.
Agreed. Okay.
And fun against. I personally think he's fun for that reason. I think he's fun. Like you can never be, I think, too mad at a hero who's balanced. Like,
so I'll give one caveat. Well, go ahead. Is as I know a lot of tank players hate Discord.
Yeah, that's true. I know this as a tank player. I know how horrible it is to get burnt down.
Yeah.
But I still think that if I'm fighting a Zen, or if I'm ever in a situation where I'm dueling a Zen, it's like 9 out of 10 times feels like a skill matchup, unless I'm ball, in which case, this is just a free farm. But
yeah,
if I'm any DPS and I'm dueling a Zen, or if I'm like an Ana and I'm dueling a Zen, it's like, okay, you hit your shot, I hit my shot. One of the whoever does it. So
yeah. I think Discord alone is like what makes him frustrating to play against. Harmony's not frustrating. Trance is not a particularly frustrating ultimate. The actual 1v1 duels that you're incorporated against is mechanical play. If you get right-clicked by Zen, you're like, hey, okay, maybe that was a little luck, but hey, you still had to hit the shots.
Yeah, sometimes it can be frustrating, but yeah.
But I think Discord is the only major thing, and that's kind of targets a specific... it's definitely like frustrating for flankers, but they're also enabled by it as well. Tank, it's just more like just... screw up tank. So I think you compare him, I think 3 probably, or 3.5.
Yeah, I was gonna say 3.
Probably
3.5. I think is fair.
Yeah, it's tough because we also have to incorporate low and high ranks when we consider fun against. And if I were to do low ranks, I'd say Zen's a 4. Like, who cares about Zen? But as high ranks, it's more like a 2.5. So we kind of have to find somewhere in between, because it's like the thing that makes him annoying isn't relevant at all until you get to the higher ranks. But so it's tough for me. So it's like 3.5, I guess, depending on where you fall on the rank spectrum.
Yeah, I think 3.5 actually might be fair now that I think about it, because it's like we're dropping the 0.5 for his Discord, and other than that, I don't think there's any frustrating aspect of it, right? It's not like you're not like, oh, I can't believe I lost that Zen. What a load of bullshit. It's just like, well, he just hit you with the shots, bro.
Yeah. And like we said, the Discord is only really, really relevant, high diamond masters. It starts to really kick in as oh, that's rough. Low ranks, it's less of a big factor, I guess, in terms of obnoxiousness, I guess. Okay, well, I guess that wraps it up. Do we quickly go through again and reevaluate our supports?
Yeah, have a look.
All right. Why don't you do Ana?
Okay, so Ana, skill floor 2.5. Again, I think when we compare it around, slightly easier to get into Zen, I think that's fair because of the, we spoke about the positioning and how easily you get farmed. I think, there's intuitive parts of her kit, which is why this is not as high as it otherwise would be. Because obviously there's a lot of mechanical demand, but there's parts of her kit which are very easy to intuit, and you can just up the bum of your tank, so that's fine. skill ceiling, you know, we know she's an amazing like hero at the highest level, like has so much, as you said, highest APM probably. You know, she's got to do something all the time. Who doesn't love watching like ML7 play Ana, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely there. That's definitely fair. I think value floor. Yeah, I think, you know, even a medium amount of nades landed, you know, a medium amount of shots landed, one in every few sleep darts landing is a lot of impact. You know, it's a lot of, particularly nade. I think nade really, I think, inflates this because it's so powerful. If even hits like 2 people, it's like really big. So I think that's fair. Value ceiling. Again, I think she is very strong. It's just that we've as we discussed, she's not been in the meta for a while. So that makes this number lower than otherwise might be, where she doesn't necessarily have a meta defining place anywhere. But you know, she's gonna get you value if you're hitting stuff, and
I'll
she's gonna give you
2 things.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, interrupt. First off, we should probably put an asterisk there because he put an asterisk on like everything. Because she does have one meta defining thing, that she is very good with Monkey, because Monkey is a hero who is like a brawlier type dive hero. So he doesn't like he needs more healing resource, but he's also very mobile. So heroes that provide more healing, like Bap and Moira, they don't like him because he's too mobile. But he's also not so mobile that he doesn't need as much healing, like a Ball, for example. So he does kind of generally need an Ana support. So Ana, if Monkey does end up being more meta, because we did see Monkey get extra armor, so maybe we see Ana come back in a little bit.
And that brief period when Genji was meta and everybody was nanoblading the fuck up.
Yeah, true. That's a good point.
Yeah, so I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Buffs, nerfs, again, I think she's good. She's in a good spot. The only reason she doesn't get played is, as we said, those other concerns. So it's not a weakness issue, I don't think. It's more like how she interacts with the meta. And fun for that reason, you know, balanced hero, skillful hero. Everybody kind of respects the Ana play. Obviously nade is frustrating. So nade is probably the one reason we've bumped it down, I think. But I think other than that, and obviously long CCs like sleep, as you said, like it's never fun to be slept as a Reinhardt, particularly if it was kind of like chucked in a general direction, but it's not the worst thing.
Agreed. Okay, for Bap, skill floor 2, this was basically comparing ourselves to Ana. It was essentially, hey, this hero is a little bit easier to grasp, to understand like how and why his cooldowns work, because a lot more of his cooldowns are just basically about simple sustain. There's not like a duality nature of Ana nade with lamp or shift. You know, it's just you use the cooldown, you pump out healing, and you shoot enemies. Now, he's not incredibly easy because there are some level of mechanics with him, but he's a very intuitive hero. Kind of what you see is what you get. There's not a lot of stuff that you have to figure out with the hero. In terms of ceiling, a little lower than Ana, but still high, because obviously you have to still hit your shots, and things like lamp become a little bit trickier to know when and how to use properly. And because, like we said, the mechanics simply is a huge part of Bap's kit the higher up in the ranks that you go. So it's not even it's like you have to be able to grasp that, and it's also you're rewarded more for that. So you spend more time in your mechanics, you're going to be getting more done with the hero, and so that's something that we kind of place on the skill ceiling, because that's an expectation for as Baps improve, their mechanics improve as well. Value floor, again, the hero exists. He put out a lot of sustain, comparable to Ana, a little bit behind on the ultimate value. Because his value, like his ultimate's a little trickier to use sometimes, but he does have that enhanced sustain. He dies a lot less than most of the other supports in the cast because of his survivability, the lamp, the shift, the mobility. And then in terms of ceiling, again, meta dependent. We should probably add an asterisk here as well. Let me add one.
We've just added an asterisk to every support.
We really should.
We reserve the right to renege.
We did. We did.
Other than Moira.
That's true. But basically, the hero has good poke potential, and what he lacks in like an actual good range, he does have good spam, good poke, which does, like, when we always say like supporting angles and things like that, I think like being able to shoot those angles is something. It counts for something. So I think that's where his value ceiling comes high, as well as he is synergized well with more spammy heroes for some time, and just his solo survivability while still being able to put out damage. Whereas we look at heroes like Moira, Lucio, they're solo survivable, but they can't do any threat while they're doing that. And I think Bap kind of is able to fill that role. Buffs, nerfs. I mean, we talked a little bit about Lamp, some of the suggestions about like making Lamp have a little more counterplay. And he has been off and on meta for a long time, as well as receiving some recent buffs with the window. So something to kind of keep an eye on. And then fun to play against. it's mostly just because like, hey, this hero is really, really hard to kill, and Lamp is annoying to play against. And so it's like again, we talked about like the shift example of like, hey, you force a Bap shift if you're a flanker, like who cares? You now cannot kill Bap, and you haven't really felt like, hey, I forced a really valuable cooldown, and so they're gonna screw up my team. It's like it's kind of just there to keep him alive and just to be generally obnoxious, as well as Lamp obviously being a highly like just a hated cooldown for a long time. I think that's mostly fair. Maybe fun against is a little low, because I'm thinking like our criteria for Discord only costing us 0.5 was because it affected mostly higher ranks and it didn't really impact lower ranks. So I look at BAP and I'm like, hey, Lamp being awful and shift survivability is more a high rank issue and less of a low rank issue. So maybe 2.5, because
I think that's fair.
I don't see BAP as being like a really unfun hero in the lower ranks, to be honest.
No, I think, funnily enough, he's not really picked much in the lower ranks either. But yeah, I agree. I think he's
okay.
Not that bad.
True. Brig?
Yeah. So skill floor again. Despite sometimes the community's perception of her being like dumb, mouth breather, drooling all over a hero, she does actually have a lot of like trickiness to her, particularly with the recent changes that that she's. Well, I say recent changes. When has Brig not been being changed? But with the changes over time, she's quite fragile actually if gotten wrong, and understanding what you're doing in the team is important too. You are not. Although the raid boss Brig is the meme, and of course if you nano her or she's rallying, yes, she is raid boss Brig, but generally she isn't raid boss Brig anymore. You will get punished if you try to bash out like a maniac. So yeah, it's not actually as easy as it looks. Basically, skill ceiling. There's some intricacies, not as hard as certain other supports. So not necessarily, there's not that mechanical demand obviously as there is with Ana, Bap, and Zen. But there is still some nuance required of what you're doing when you're doing it. So for that reason, kind of the middling skill ceiling. Value floor, again, thinking about what a Brig would be like in like a sort of platinum level, there's a good chance that your team might not really get too much value out of you because you're probably not coordinating with them properly. You're probably not doing exactly what you should be doing. They're probably going to be like miles away from you, not being under the AoE of your healing.
Yeah.
So
your armor packing,
you could definitely go anonymous.
when you have a Moira like healing him. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, there's a potential for like a lot to go wrong and for your hero to not feel impactful in any way. Whereas with value ceiling, obviously we know that she's been very, very strong. Of course, the classic caveat of like the asterisk of if the meta changes, she might not be very good at all. But again, like we spoke about how like if Zen is strong, we need Brig, and mostly she exists because of the strength of certain heroes that mandate her being played, right? It's like if Ball is strong and Trace is strong, then you need Brig because otherwise they're just going to run over everybody. So it's a nice mix. I think it's a nice balance there, and we just put an asterisk in case in sort of like maybe some aspect of her kit needs reworking because people obviously find Raleigh frustrating. They find the armor pack frustrating. So something needs to be looked at. I don't think she needs like a flat buff or nerf because that doesn't change doesn't change what's the frustration that people have potentially. So
right.
If something was to be looked at, it would be perhaps the nature of how armor pack can just kind of fly across and help in these DPS duels from a range that doesn't seem becoming of Brig, or how Rally just kind of makes certain heroes really, really strong, and maybe that needs to be changed. But like I said, I don't think they're keen on changing that aspect of Rally. I think the devs like what Rally is kind of conceptually. And fun against, we kind of obviously someone might look at this list and be like, "What the fuck, fun against too?" Like, no, Brig. But again, this is it's a sort of more recent update. She's not the beast she once was. She's not the oppressive anti-dive character she once was. She does die if you focus her quite easily, and there's a lot more counterplay to her. So I don't think she's as bad as she once was.
No, agreed. Okay. For Lucio, we looked at skill floor, like the heroes existing a little higher than we initially gave, because I think you brought up a good point of like, hey, we kind of want to incorporate wall climbing as part of the floor, because that's like you have to do something. You can't just AFK as Lucio, one skill floor, he does nothing, he just stands there and heals on. You have to actually put some effort in, and that's when Lucio really starts to steeply climb up in terms of difficulty, which leads us to the ceiling, right? If you're doing every little bit of thing in terms of positioning, landing the proper boops, hitting your shots on the right amp, on the right speed, there's everything about Lucio that is very difficult to play. The only thing maybe preventing him from being a 4 is that the shots aren't super impactful and not really necessary to always be perfectly accurate, but it is something that is really important, as well as you're less likely to be punished for it. Value floor, again, like, is not a great hero. He's a little inflexible with what he does, even in lower ranks, and also, even in lower ranks, we're looking to like putting out mass amounts of sustain. Like Lucio does that like to a comparable level of like Moira and Bap in different ways, but he does so with like even less utility. Like lower ranks are less likely to find different ways of getting value out of boop outside of riding around an Ilios well and booping somebody in, and they might not even be able to do that, right? So it's difficult. And the same thing with ceiling, although ceiling is obviously, you know your job, you know your role, but the meta just sucks for you right now. But again, obviously that's pending and change depending on if we see brawl meta, because he is a must pick in brawl meta. Buffs, nerfs, maybe a buff. I like your ideas about like encouraging players to kind of utilize different parts of their kick, specifically that wall ride. Like, let's get more players to that skill floor. And I think that was a good idea without like breaking the hero. And then fun against, mostly fine. Outside of boop is pretty annoying. So honestly, maybe we could bump fun against a little higher.
Yeah, I think maybe
like
a 3.
Yeah, I think 1.5 for just boop is a little harsh.
Yeah.
So I think 3 is fine. You do Mercy. My cat is begging to be fed. I'll be back in like 1 minute.
Sure. Okay, no worries. So yeah, Mercy was a lot of discussion. I think a lot of interesting discussion. But yeah, so we said skill floor. I mean, there's we were kind of debating whether it should be a 1 or a 1.5. We ended up going with 1.5 because there's more to her than say a Moira or a Bastion, right? There is, even though the execution of the abilities is quite straightforward, it's quite easy to go left click, right click, or Valk and then left click, right click. The positioning elements and the understanding of like what you're doing as a character does bump it up that 0.5, right? It's not enough to just left click, right click, whatever's in your sight. There does need to be some consideration of like who you're left click, right clicking. Skill ceiling, we went with 2.5 because, again, even though there's an ease of access to the use of the abilities, there is so much decision making involved constantly of like when you damage boost, who you damage boost, where you're flying, where you're positioned. Of course, at the pro level, there's the shot calling, there's the flank checking, there's the other, the external. Meta is a confusing term, but the external to the character itself elements that you need to bear in mind. Value floor, I think there's a good amount of value to be provided. I think we decided it was like slightly more than Lucio, but slightly less than say a Bap or an Ana, because there's not necessarily, your impact isn't necessarily skyrocketing if you suddenly land a big thing like a nade or immortality,
right?
But the passive value can be very strong, and you can actually get a lot done if you're a dynamic Mercy. Value ceiling, again, right now she's very strong when in a meta where DPS and split play is very, very powerful, very prominent right now, because she can fly between these people very easily. That also consequently buffs her survivability, and obviously enabling DPS in DPS duels is very, very strong. But the asterisk, because should the meta change, should it be brawly, she is just like, zero value. There's like no reason to pick Mercy in a brawl state. So that's the asterisk. Buffs and nerfs, again, I think she's fine in terms of strength largely. It's just more the idea of like, are there elements of her kit we could look at, such as res, and whether that could be shifted in any way. I obviously gave the suggestion of beam degeneration in another attempt to sort of soft encourage certain playstyles over others, but it's not a must by any means. I think it's fine. And again, fun against, like, there's nothing really that obnoxious against playing against Mercy other than the potential, if she's enabling someone, it can make it very difficult to duel that person. So I think that's where we landed. And obviously, if you get glocked, yeah, that is like, there's no worse feeling than getting glocked by the Valking. It's legit like the hardest one-on-one in the game. Like, I don't know who's winning these one-on-ones consistently.
I've won with Zen. It's winnable, but it's rough. You can't miss your shots because you can out DPS but it is really, really rough. But yeah. Okay. Moira, everybody's favorite skill floor. I mean, it's legitimately just like the hero is so incredibly easy to grasp. It's really just the orb usage and maybe a little bit of the resource management that makes her a little tricky. And unfortunately, like even as you get better at Moira, you're just basically getting better at the things. There's no new tricks or tips or mindsets or mentalities. It's just about cleaning up the basics that you already learned from your skill floor. And that means that even as you get better at the hero, your experience that the hero doesn't really change. It's the same thing over and over and over again. However, with being such a basic hero that does at least have some good things to bring to the table, like with her ultimate, etc., her value floor is relatively high. She's not oppressive or busted necessarily in lower ranks, but she does provide a lot of value for very little effort, which means that you can very easily hit your skill floor and operate doing good things at your skill floor. You build your cold. That's a very impactful ultimate. Obviously, we didn't put her at like a 4 because resource management was a little bit of an issue for lower rank Moiras, but something to consider. And then ceiling is just really low. Like she's a hero that's obviously affected by meta to an extent. But this is the one we didn't asterisk because like even if the meta is favorable, maybe we don't even see her then because she's just so inflexible to what she does, and more important than that, she's not only inflexible, she's also bad at what she does. So very, very, very difficult to get a lot of value at Moira, even in higher ranks. Buffs, nerfs, nothing. She's kind of like an unfortunate circumstance of where we don't know if Blizzard wants to keep her as an easy hero, as like an entry-level hero, or she needs a rework, either one or the other. If Blizzard's fine with keeping entry-level hero, probably okay. Maybe, a rework of a damage orb to make it a little less annoying might be okay. But outside of that, I think she's fine as is. If the hero needs to be balanced on par with her other support heroes, her other support counterparts, then she needs to be simultaneously value ceiling increased as well as skill floor skill ceiling increased. Otherwise, she's just going to be broken. Fun against, not fun at all. There's nothing about Moira's kit that's redeemable at all. Her right click is a little more challenging. So, I mean, we could have a -5 here if it was old right click. But thankfully, it takes a little bit of tracking, but it's such a low, so low. And along with the orb, coalescence, just there's so many annoying little things about Moira. Her fade, just a get out of jail free card. Like there's a lot of annoying things about Moira that are not fun to play against. But yeah.
Yeah, and then finally our boy Zen, Spilo's favorite. Skill floor, again, very difficult to position as Zen. You have to have the mechanical ability. And although they're easy to execute, Harmony and Discord, it can be a little bit sometimes. I mean, Discord is easy to kind of do an entry level, but Harmony can be deceptive, where it's like, you can end up just wasting Harmony theoretically if you're just orbiting on the wrong person. It's just a waste. And I think particularly because of how easy he is to pounce upon, I think that's where the skill floor comes in. Skill ceiling, again, as we spoke about, the best support players are the Zen players, because when you max this hero out, the value just skyrockets. So the elements that can be maxed, the mechanics, the positioning, the discourse usage, even the trans usage now, which is more dynamic than it's ever been before, there's a lot of elements to just keep min-maxing. Value floor, yeah, I mean, you can die quite easily, but if you are alive, hey, you got 2 orbs out, and you should be, if you chuck enough projectiles, they will hit something. So you're going to get some value just by existing. And value ceiling, again, he has been meta defining for a while because of the power of Discord, because of the power of his damage, because of his ability to kind of influence the split comp DPS duels. Makes him very, very strong. But the asterisk returns because should the meta shift, he might again be vulnerable if Brawl becomes a thing. Buffs and nerfs, no, he's very well. He's in a great spot, I think. A difficult to entry, difficult master hero that provides a lot of value is exactly what you want to see. Clear cost benefit. And fun against for that reason, I think, there's no reason to dislike Zenyatta other than the Discord orb, which, yes, melts you as a tank. But other than that, and maybe the odd random right click. But again, I think there's a lot of like things to like about when you go up against Zen. It just feels like you're both playing a skill matchup.
Yeah, exactly.
And that concludes our
Holy smokes. I feel like we did a better job this time around than we did with the DPS in terms of we didn't go back and go, oh man, we really scuffed that. I think like we kind of got a better idea of like what we were expecting and what we wanted, and it meant that like there were fewer adjustments on when we revised it. which I think doesn't necessarily mean we did a better job. But at least we were consistent, like, oh man. Well,
yeah, it's easier to stick to our metrics, I think, when it's like not 17 heroes or whatever, as opposed to like, just 7 is a little bit tighter. I think you can keep perspective. Whereas with DPS, there's so many and so varying that it can be a little bit hard to.
Yeah, that's actually another good point. Just the sheer number of DPS made it hard to like consistently stay, because we felt like it was easier to compare back and forth quickly, like as we were going along the list. But with DPS, that was a lot harder. Well, I really appreciate this, SVB. This was a lot of fun. I was like thinking, oh, it supports, it's like half the number will be like half the time. Nope,
not quite.
Not even close. About the same amount of time, I actually think. So, but I had a blast doing it. Thank you so much.
No, likewise, man. Thank you for, it's of course your inception, your idea. So thank you for inviting me along. Yeah, I had a lot of fun as well. And yeah, I think we did a good job. And of course, now it just remains the old tanky boys, which we'll get to at some point.
Yep.
And
Yep.